All right. Well, episode 8 of our podcast, we had Sig Mosley on our last episode. Before we get into the topics of discussion for today, any thoughts that you've had since our conversation with Sig last Friday? Maybe, something that you thought, oh, wow, that would have been great to ask him, or anything that's come to mind, or you're pretty happy with how that went? And
I thought it went really well, and I was happy to hear his response to the question I asked about his attitude toward work. Yep. And how work was always embedded in his psyche, or his mentality from young age on up. And the question I asked him was, do you feel that this massively contributed to get you where you are right now? And he answered the way I thought, which was absolutely. Right. And it just reaffirmed in my mind the value of hard work. Still, that in this country especially, if you focus and take care of business, it pays dividends.
Absolutely. Putting in the hours that other people aren't willing to. I mean, that's one way of many to set yourself apart, for sure. Yeah. The other kind of comment I had, which is not as maybe poignant as the comment that you made, watching back through it, doing like the timestamps, so people can see, hey, this is what we're talking about at this section of the video. We were talking about his experience working with the milkman, and I forget the exact scenario, but when he was talking about that he would get the carton of chocolate milk, and I asked if it was whole fat chocolate milk. Our noise levels all got so loud. It was like, a very ape-like response from all of us. And it wasn't actually like that sound that I just made, but it was very reminiscent of that excitement level. All of us getting way too excited about chocolate milk. But that was one thing that I kind of found funny. Again, someone that's owning a drone company, a musician, a pronounced venture capitalist, angel investor, one commonality amongst us all. We all really like chocolate milk, whole fat chocolate milk. Any other thoughts that you wanted to cover from Sig's podcast before I kind of abruptly change gears here?
No, he's one of the most interesting people, that we've had so far on this podcast. And I mean, the guy is really a significant player in the business community, right? And absolutely, to get that moniker, the godfather of angel investing, he's respected by a lot of people. That's helped a lot of entrepreneurs. And so kudos to you you're the guy, you and Brian grabbed him and made contact initial with him and brought him in the podcast. So good job.
Yeah, we just threw him in the van. He had no idea what was coming. No, I appreciate that.
We need more, and I hope we have other players coming in that are at his level, his caliber.
Well, I know we've talked about this, and again, don't have it scheduled yet, but something to look forward to is Dennis Hayes. I've started working with him. Just to recap your memory, he's one of the early pioneers, inventors of the computer modem. And again, he might not even say that he invented the computer modem in the same way that, we've talked about kind of the pioneering figures like the Henry Ford of the automobile industry, Sam Colt of like the Colt revolver. And he's like, in that case, commonly attributed to being the inventor of the revolver. But if you go back even in like the earliest days, Samuel Colt never, claimed to invent the revolver, right? And I think that same sort of attribution has happened to Dennis because it's just easier to say, hey, he invented the PC modem, at least in the form that we all know today, where, there's already PC modems, that essentially could do the same thing, but just not, at the same speeds or in the same convenience or whatever. I that's, again, beyond my time, technologically speaking. I think Jim kind of at a surface level. I mean, honestly,
certainly have used modems.
Yeah, honestly, to the same level of understanding that I have are probably not all that different, right? But needless to say, we should be getting him on the podcast here sometime in the next month-ish. I know he goes back and forth between like the Metro Atlanta area as well as like the Spartanburg, South Carolina area. So I think he's here in town or around town for, again, like the next month or so. And he expressed interest in coming and doing this. It's just a matter of coordinating a date with him. I had sent him an email actually earlier this morning because we're doing a virtual presentation through his organization, ATVL, the American Technology Venture Lab. And that's May 2nd, so don't have anything really more to share about that right now, but I think more promotional material will be going out about that event later today. So again, just we'll bring Dennis in, again, to use your words, kind of a person of that caliber. Actually, it was funny when I had ran into Sig most recently before our podcast at the state capitol building. Of course, Sig knows anyone just about that's built a business of prominence, out of the metro Atlanta area. And that's where Dennis Hayes had microcomputer systems, or Hayes microcomputer products or computer systems. And so, of course, Sig and Dennis being roughly about the same age, at least relative to my age, they go way back. So it'll be kind of interesting to maybe even get Dennis Hayes' input, on his experiences working with Sig, because I don't know that, any history between them other than that brief mention there in the state capitol. And then, of course, in the state capitol, also mentioned Rich McCormick. I've done a little bit more outreach to his team to see if we can get a date coordinated. Pretty much falling on deaf ears. I got a hold of someone at his local office, his district office up here and coming. But other than that, still kind of waiting to get something on the calendar. So for the time being, there's a few other people wanting to schedule. Again, not to say they're not of that caliber per se, but I think there's many people, regardless of what they've done, what pursuits they have in life, we can have interesting conversations with. And I think that's the whole point of this, as much as it is nice to get, in the case of Sig, someone that's known, more regionally speaking, or even as we continue to do this, get more people on that we have interest in, even at a national level. I think it's important not to lose sight, just people that we're interested in, despite what their notoriety is. Right.
Sure.
But again, kind of shifting gears. So obviously there's been a lot of talk about the reorganization of trade agreements and, the tariffs. How have you been following that over the last week? And I know obviously it's had a pretty profound impact on the stock market. Again, this is April 11th, the morning of when we're recording this. So just to give an insight into, a day in the life of the stock market or a week in the life of the stock market, 2025, what's your outlook? And again, beyond the stock market,
Yeah. Well, it's a roller coaster for sure. And a lot of people, the problem with the tariff situation is, from my perspective and my opinion and my perspective, is that it's leaving American corporations with a big level of uncertainty to the point where CEOs and CFOs, they cannot give guidance to shareholders through their quarterly, reports, because corporations have to report quarterly, right? And they give guidance, and all the stock analysts and hence millions of people across this country who are investors with mutual funds or individual investors, they take that guidance and make decisions. And with these tariffs, the way it is right now, there's a big area of an unknown. There's a big variable unknown. So people can't give guidance because they don't know what the hell's happening, or what could happen. So that's one of the main reasons why, in my opinion, that's very important to say those three words, because this is all so opinion. You could have two brilliant economists from New York City working in the financial world, and they could have opposing views and back those views up with tons of facts and tons of data, etc. It still comes down to an opinion. Right. No one really knows what the stock market is. This massive, complex thing, right? That really is alive on its own. Right. So, and I was telling a friend the other day, when you click on the news or the financial news, and the report comes up and says, well, the Dow fell 200 points today based on a jobless report that came out, or a job report, job claim. That is that network's opinion. It took me a long time to realize that when I first started getting into investing. I would try to, okay, so they're saying that it's based on the jobs report. Well, I need to research that. Well, yeah, it's partly based on the jobs report, but no one really knows. So my main point to you is, I guess, is that there are a lot of unknowns right now. The stock market does not like unknowns. It likes to have an idea of what's coming. That's why when there's political gridlock, it's actually good for the economy or good for stocks and good for corporations, because there's not going to be any legislation that's actually going to get freaking passed. So it's business as usual. Right. So when you have a Democrat president and you have Republican-controlled House and Republican-controlled Senate, you're going to get, or
vice versa.
When one of the three, if you have one party in control of all three, then yeah, you have a much better chance of seeing legislation passed that's going to actually mean something that could really cause unrest. We're seeing that right now. A lot of it is presidential orders, though, executive orders. But sorry to be roundabout with my answer. Main thing I guess I'll say is that there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of unknowns, and it's causing problems. And as far as the market falling, that's another subject in a way. But people are scared and they're making rash decisions, and that's my understanding with investing, because I've been interested in it for quite some time now, since I was about 18 years old. That's one of the worst things you can do, is to let emotion take control. Right. And you start making decisions, especially when it's on a lot of money that's in your money.
Right.
So you have to really watch those emotions.
It's easy to say, "Oh, let me just grab what I can,"
Sell.
Yeah, right.
Run, get to cash and protect your. I have a friend of mine a musician friend, who told me, and I know he's happy right now that he did this, but he went all to cash. Yep. He sold everything and went to cash. This was several weeks ago. And he's actually
pretty good buying power right now.
He has successfully timed the market.
Right.
But the you read any kind of investing literature, it'll tell you to stay away from timing, because it's so hard to predict this market, the stock market.
And he's got it right for now, right? Yeah. Exactly.
He's still got you can sell at a top and go to cash, and it can fall. But now you have a really tough decision to make, which is, when do you get back in?
Right.
Because a lot of people will, like we saw the market climb, the Dow climbed, over 2,000 points a couple days ago after Trump put that 90-day suspension.
Pause, right. Yep.
Yeah, pause on the tariff situation. So we saw the market jump, and then we lost like 1,200 points on the Dow yesterday. So if you'd bought in 2 days ago, your value has probably dropped in that 1 day period.
Yeah, I think you touched on like the speculation, right, where people are uncertain about the market more than typical. But I think it's so easy to like understand in the space that I'm in, right, where I'm building a tech company, and you're in the market of early stage investors, right? And obviously that's a very speculative investment, right? Or, a very risky investment. And it gets so easy to think about the stock market as something that's tried and true. You just sit and forget, so to speak, that, to your point, when we have a shakeup, politically speaking, it kind of shines a light on the stock market in a way that, reminds us, hey, this is all just speculation as well, right? As, tried and true as it has been, for most of its history, for decades on end. Again, just taking the sit and forget sort of approach, taking the long-term, approach, not trying to do the timing, especially with day trading, as has become popular really since, like, I don't know, you could correct me if you know better, but the early 2000s, really when internet trading became available.
Right.
But one other impact that I've seen, specifically with the drone industry, that I took a note of, as of February of this year, one of the most common drones that are bought for, the professionals that are individual drone operators, and they want to go offer their services as an independent drone operator, right? As like an independent business owner. And then there's insurance companies, there's oil companies, there's law enforcement agencies, other government institutions that rely on these drones, called the DJI Matrice 4. And the price and the DJI Matrice 4 Enterprise was about $4,500 in February. April 1st, $7,500. April 9th, $10,000. April 10th, $12,025. Safe to say, don't buy drones right now. Wait for the storm to settle. And that's from I guess a tweet or I don't know what the X posts are called anymore. Maybe it's called just that, X post. Drone U or the Drone U, they're a big organization. They're not actually a formal university like a public or state university, anything like that. But they're basically a go-to online resource where if you want to take like a class, an online class to get your Part 107, your like commercial drone certificate, they have, training material and a guide to help you prepare for that test. And they just do like a podcast about drone news. And I haven't watched any of that in quite some time, but I did see this post and I thought that was a very tangible way of seeing, some of the impacts on these trade negotiations, the trade war, the tariffs, however you want to frame it. There is a very real reordering or restructuring going on that, again, we'll see what happens on quote unquote the other side. But people have asked me up until, over the last few weeks and really leading up to Trump's presidency, post-Trump getting elected, taking office, how that's affected, our drone business, with ordering components from China, a lot of the components that we order for our drones are still coming over from China, right? And
so you've got what, 135% tariff, 134% tariff now.
So some of our component prices have actually gone down in price since we last placed orders earlier this year or at the end, towards the end of last year. And I was just placing more component orders yesterday. So we're still like actually benefiting from this more so because it's the end product that's coming over from China or a lot of these other countries. And again, it's important to remember these tariffs aren't really just across the board, even though a lot of the times it's been presented as reciprocal tariffs. Right. I mean, it is really a case by case basis. And in that sense, it's reciprocal, but it's not like, hey, all of the exports from one country being imported into our country, they're not just being tariffed the same way, right? It's looking, what are the goods that are coming in from a specific country and then categorizing those and tariffing those specific categories or making sure market manipulation isn't happening to those purchases, especially when then we're sending our goods over to those countries. We might say, hey, it's the equivalent of $350 US. So they say, well, this is equivalent to $350 US, but they just actually printed more money and say, hey,
it's currency manipulation.
Exactly, right.
Which is kind of a backdoor way of a tariff in and of itself.
And that was Trump's
what
point.
You just talked about, what you just said is that like you guys are not buying drones from China. You're buying components. OEM, right? Original equipment manufacturer. You're buying stuff from an OEM, and which you're using to make your drones, right?
Yeah. And sorry to get excited cutting you off. Same thing happening with the automotive industry, right? Yeah. It's the tariffs aren't affecting where the components are, right? And again, there's no clean way to do this. I was listening to, there's a popular podcast, Cars and Bids, is an organization like where you can go buy cars online, like enthusiast cars. And there's a popular YouTuber that's now doing a podcast as well. And he was talking about the impact where he thinks it should be done at the component level. But then you got to think about there's components within components, right? So where do you draw that line if it's not the end product that you're drawing the line at, right? And so that's where we're not being affected because there's, again, to protect the American consumer, any of like the Chinese websites where we buy a lot of our components from, like AliExpress is a notable one. There's a few others that they're almost kind of like the Chinese Amazon. We've bought everything from motors to like the connectors for our wires, the wires themselves, the radio modules that we use. Most recently, we just purchased from them. Because we try to buy from American suppliers, but when the American suppliers are out, we go basically essentially directly to the source, which are the Chinese storefronts online. And it's essentially like AliExpress is almost like the Chinese Amazon, but in the case of, Amazon, they don't have like the direct component suppliers that have like their official store on Amazon. So technically you might be able to find some of those components on Amazon, but it's fairly rare in limited quantities, and then you're paying higher prices than just, paying directly from China, even because I'm pretty cognizant of looking for, free shipping versus, an item that may be cheaper elsewhere, but we make sure to factor in the cost of goods as they land in our office, right? And then build out our spreadsheet. And long story short, many components come from China that we buy. Motors again, yeah.
And just to recap, you're saying that even with all this, the tariff situation that's happened, you have not seen an increase in the pricing for your components that you're purchasing from China, OEM stuff that you're buying.
Now, where we are seeing
no increase at all, no increase at all, because
not in the last few months. Prior to the last few months, again, and this is where, in my opinion, it's not just this new phenomena that the economy is kind of in the shitter, for lack of a better way to put it. Like is being portrayed by a lot of people. Kind of a lot of fanatical people that I've seen both in person as well as online talking about how just overnight, seemingly really since January, 6th or 10th or, whenever Trump's inauguration was, it's like all of a sudden the flip's been switched and now people are talking about how bad the economy was. But you've heard me use this saying, ad nauseum, that it's just as difficult, if not more difficult than ever to make $1 million. But what's not so arguable is how little of a distance $1 million goes, right?
Yeah,
and
it doesn't.
That's not new as of January this year, right? That's been happening in some cases not so steadily over the last couple decades, and really last few decades, but I think very egregiously so over the last couple decades. And again, that really manifests. And while, over those last few decades, we've been able to buy all these consumer goods at, a cheap price point, and China's not, they weren't jacking up the prices as they are now, when we're saying, hey, you know what? We're building your middle class at the expense of our own middle class, right? And when all of a sudden we're trying to rip off the Band-Aid, a lot of people are waking up to the fact, oh my God, yeah, we've had all these cheap goods, but most of those people are already in houses, already have transportation taken care of, and those prices have skyrocketed, and those have far outweighed the cost savings from the consumer goods that we've been able to enjoy. If you look at the cost of housing, cost of transportation, add up all of your other consumer goods that you use in your life, they don't even come close to the inflation as seen in housing and transportation.
Interesting.
But, that's an opinion, I guess, not bound in facts. That's an inside joke for everyone here. But, I don't know. Any other thoughts about that? Do you see it differently, or do you think there's more to the economy suddenly just kind of being portrayed by many to be not working for them?
It really is. I don't mean to say this in a way that's a cheap scapegoat answer or whatever, or, run for the hills, but it's anyone's guess, man. Yeah. It's anyone's bet here. I mean, there's so much uncertainty. That's the main reason, in my opinion, why the market is doing what it's doing, and people are just scared, and they don't really know. And when a corporation can't tell what the landscape looks like 6 months from now, a year from now,
right,
based on political decisions in Washington and how it could change. If a CEO makes a wrong decision, I mean, they're under enough pressure as it is just to manage and keep their company profitable. I mean, as a CEO of Drone or ViView,
yep,
you got a lot of things to consider just to run it on a day-to-day basis. Well, if the laws are going to be changing, possibly, that could totally alter the landscape. You can make a decision that makes sound sense now,
yep,
but if a law comes in, or if legislative branch passes something that could change the terrain, it could force you out of business or hurt your company, significantly. Nothing that you've done or a decision that you made the decision, but it's right, because of the laws changing. So there's just a lot of, it's not good for the market what's going on right now. Having said that, I mean, I'm not saying that what's going on is necessarily a bad thing. I support, the President Trump's moves, some of the things he's doing. I feel it's time that serious change needs to happen. We just can't continue on with this debt situation, especially.
Right. So. Yeah, and I think that change brings the uncertainty that you're talking about, right? And I think for me, it's long overdue, but that's coming from someone that, on a day-to-day basis embraces change or the unknown, as it is. And yeah, to your point about from the position of someone like leading a company, I mean, especially with where we're at, today, I mean, not just from a decision standpoint, if I'm not there to make a decision, like if I drop dead today, IBU dies tomorrow,
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of weight, even beyond the political sphere, for a lot of these CEOs or executives, founder types that isn't really appreciated. We were having a conversation about this last Friday evening and talking about like the pay disparity between the quote unquote average employee, right? That's maybe making an hourly wage, working part-time or full-time hours. And then I think what the average salary here in America, about $70,000, I think actually closer to $60,000 and $70,000. And I think there's a point brought up, I forgot who brought up the point, that is there really a 700 times difference between, the
CEO pay versus a floor person.
Right. And what are your thoughts on that? Kind of if you can recalling your thoughts from that we discussed last Friday, or
it was a heated discussion.
Yeah,
so there was a lot of passionate discussion about that. I think my position on all that is that it all is based on the market. And when you look at these, let's say a house that someone in Buckhead. When I first moved to Atlanta 25 years ago, a little bungalow in Buckhead was $225,000. And this is a home that was built in 1940, one car garage, 1,500, maybe 1,500 square feet, something like that, $250,000. And this is 25 years ago. That little bungalow today is probably over 600,000 probably, Is it really worth that? Is it really worth that money? Well, it is. Why? Because the market,
someone is willing to pay
someone's willing to pay it. And the same kind of formula I think applies with the pay scale thing. I know it's a different, example. When I hear people compare, and I am remembering the conversation because you cannot compare the responsibility and what's required of a CEO, especially of a publicly traded company. I mean, you're a CEO, you're a private company, you don't have shareholders.
And there's still the immense responsibility, again, from the perspective.
Absolutely.
If I'm not doing my job correctly, or if I die tomorrow even, it dies tomorrow.
If you had 10
10,000
employees and you're publicly traded and you had to answer not only to keep the company going and keep those employees, make sure that they have their paycheck every 2 weeks or every month. And now on top of that, you got shareholders that you're responsible to make sure that the company remains profitable. There's no way you can, in my opinion, again, there's no way one can compare the jobs and the compensation for the person in charge of that versus somebody that gets up and goes to work, does their job for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatnot, goes home and gets to turn it off.
Right.
These CEOs are living they're consumed with this. And you really have to be a gifted person, in my opinion, to be an effective CEO, especially if you're in a serious publicly traded company with a lot of employees. So I feel that CEO pay, if a CEO feels bad about the pay they're receiving and they take the side that, I shouldn't receive this much money, well, give some back to your employees. But my view is the free market is the ultimate the ultimate qualifier. If the market bears it and will pay it, then it's worth that.
Right. Who are we to say otherwise?
Whether that's a house in Buckhead or whether that's the pay level of a CEO, person or senior level management. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's based on free market.
Right.
And I'm a free market guy. So.
And again, as free as a market can be, because again, that's what I think is often lost in consideration in how we're dealing with companies like in the drone industry, where there's no way in hell that any American company, especially producing their own components, can compete with the Chinese companies, right? And that's also, again, happening in the automotive industry. It's happening in all robotics, same thing. Any sort of advanced manufacturing. I mean, we are so far behind, and by and large, we've been willfully willing to hand that over to China because they have the lower wages and they already have the infrastructure built out. But also because, China has put government incentives in a lot of those industries to make it that we're not on an even playing field. The same thing happened in the memory, like the computer memory industry between Japan and the United States. And, they had to come to a mutual agreement because basically they were both killing the memory market, just further subsidizing it to compete against one another.
Government subsidy.
Yeah. And, of course, we're still doing that in agriculture, at least last I heard. I haven't heard any updates from, I don't know who's even the current head of the Department of Agriculture. I don't know if that's something that the HHS and Robert Kennedy Jr. oversees or not. I know that's something that he's very involved in. And actually, kind of jumping aside, I did see in the cabinet meeting earlier this morning, he announced that the HHS will determine the cause of autism by September.
Really?
That's their goal.
Kennedy said that?
Yep, that's his goal. Yep.
Wow.
Or that's their department
Is that
goal.
his prediction or his goal?
That's his. We will have it by September.
He's making that claim.
And Donald Trump was like, "Wow, this is going to be the biggest news conference." And he's right. I mean, if they really can come out and say, "Hey, you're consuming this, or you're, getting maybe even this shot," again, that's something that no one likes to say or talk about or hear. It's like, but why could that not be at least a contributing factor? Maybe not the primary factor, but.
Let me throw this at you,
Yeah.
and we've talked about this in the past, but this is an argument that I like to bring forth because I lean conservative in my viewpoints, right, based on my core beliefs, I would say, and what I like to tell people when there's discussion about what's happening in the economy and Donald Trump coming in and the Republicans taking control and America First agenda, all this, and there's a lot of change happening, right, and it's causing a lot of making people uncomfortable, right? Because when you have serious change, if you're really doing change, it is uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable largely. I love saying this, and I want to get your feedback on it, but I feel that there's one word that we can all bring forth with all this, because you have your opinion, I have mine. Everybody has an opinion. You know what they say about opinions? Everybody's got one, right? Yeah. And so,
they say that about other things.
Yeah, they say that about other things, but there's one thing that we can all say, and that is that this is an objective situation we're in. This guy has the balls to make serious change, profound change, and he's not there's a fruit fly flying around. He's antagonizing me. This guy is making serious change, doing what he thinks, in my opinion, doing what he thinks and his party thinks is the best course of action to put this country on a different or better trajectory than it already is, or it has been.
Got it.
Good.
Mr. Miyagi taught me well.
So we're going to know, and I say at the end of 4 years of him being in office, so 27, 28, we're going to be able to honestly sit back
and evaluate
and say, hey, did this work? And it's 3 to 4 years. It may not be exactly what people think, but are we better off or are we worse off? And that's an objective thing that we're going to be able, through all of the talking heads giving, differing opinions and reporting news differently that we have to deal with every day. People are just craving for the truth.
Right.
We're dying. I feel that Americans especially are dying to know the truth of what the hell's really going on. So that's one gram or granule of comfort that I feel comes into this situation, is that this is objective. We're going to be able to all agree, I think, in 4 years If another Republican that follows Trump is elected and comes in 28, then we might have another 4 years. There'll be 8 years. But the point is that we're going to be able to tell, I feel for sure, he's making serious change that's either going to work or it's not. So that's comforting to me to know that I feel it's going to be pretty apparent across the country.
I think to many it will, but I never think anything politically speaking will ever inherit, and really just life in general, I don't think about much, if anything, as objective. And I think, you got people, again, if you were to break it into the spectrum or sides, talking about politics here, not talking about the spectrum I'm on, but, you have the
You're
right
on the spectrum.
I mean, again, by calling it a spectrum, everyone
right.
is,
Yeah.
but in the case of the political spectrum, you have right versus left, and I think it's where was I going with that? You brought up
about objectivity.
The objectivity that you got people burying their head in the sand on both sides, right? Trump can do no wrong, make America great again, hoorah!
Yep.
Don is the man,
Yep. And
And
then
I come off across that way a lot of times. But again, what I respect most, to your point, is the transparency. And I think even when there's not a clear answer, coming out and just making those conversations known. And obviously, depending on the situation, it's not best to say, hey, we don't know. In the case of, global, politics, where, you might get asked a question about, some foreign adversary, or I think I even heard Donald Trump in his most recent press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's like, again, I'm starting to buy into all of the thoughts that maybe Israel is kind of like the puppet behind America dictating our foreign policy with how much we welcome this guy in, and I obviously think that's a very complex situation, and
right.
that wasn't giving a very nuanced, real take there. But what I did take note of was a reporter asked Trump what he thinks about happening in this region. I guess from the context I gathered from it, outside of Gaza or around Gaza. But to me, it was also very clear that Trump didn't know where exactly he was talking about, but was able to kind of say I don't know without saying I don't know, in a way that it's competence, but it's not
he's got a lot on his plate,
and he's not wanting to give people the soundbite. Could you believe that Donald Trump doesn't even know where this is in the Middle East, and it's right outside of Gaza as he's talking to Benjamin Netanyahu? And it's, of course, impossible to know everything that's going on, and that's where I think, as much as people or like you're saying, we're going to have an objective truth, in due time. With how people look at history, again, going back again last Friday, I think it's very easy. This is history. This is how it's portrayed. And, everyone has this common understanding of this is what history was. But the more and more granular that you actually go and try to understand the nuances of history, you realize that it's not so black or white, right? It's so gray, and we're getting such a maybe not distorted even, but just a sliver of what was actually happening as the events were described in a textbook or a video, or even portrayed via photos or videos, that we may have from the event. And again, just imagine, all of the content and information that we have available at our hands today. And it only gets less and less and less and less and less and less the further you go back. And so I don't think, hey, we're going to be able to have an objective, understanding of the history, because we've never been able to have an objective understanding of history.
And that's where I'll disagree with you. Respectfully disagree. Yeah. I feel that the stuff that's happening right now with the Trump administration, they are radically different than any other president I've seen in my life. And the people of this country, I feel, that voted him in, the majority, they're ready to see some serious change going on, serious change to happen. And it is happening, and he does not care about political consequences. He's not running. He can't run for a third term. I know he's throwing that out there, and I don't want to go down that tangent or get off on that, but yeah. I think he's doing that just to piss people off.
And I'm going to push back on you, because he's just a Democrat.
He's just a Democrat?
Yeah.
But
Well, when he was a business person, he'll tell you, and we all know, he supported both sides because that's what a smart business guy does.
Right.
His tariff plan is Pelosi. The video that's going out now, he's doing what Pelosi suggested in
A long time.
96.
Yeah, I have seen a little bit of that. But let me
Yeah,
stay on this,
please.
Jake, because this is important in my opinion.
Yeah.
Objectivity is something that now all the real heavy political pundits and Meet the Press and all that, they would be able to tell you, oh, well, at the end of the George H.W. Bush's term or Ronald Reagan's term, it was objective for sure. We could see that the economy did better, blah, blah, blah. And there's always degrees of it. But we're going to see, in my opinion, at the end of Trump's second term, which is coming up, right, 28 or whenever it is, we're going to be able to say, I think profoundly, that this guy either worked or he did not work. And that to me is something that, I mean, I think the common labor or whatever in this country is going to have a much clearer understanding and picture of whether or not Trump worked or he did not work for this country. He's going to be either vindicated or not. So I think it is, and that to me is comforting to know that. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to be able to face all of my left friends and say to them, and I've told them this,
How about your American friends, though?
yeah, well, we're all Americans.
Right, and that's the thing. It's like we're needlessly making the enemy, out of our own people.
I wouldn't call it enemy. I would just say
the opposition, though.
Well, yeah, it's definitely opposition. I mean, a competitive spirit is that part of Trump's makeup? Absolutely. Being able to, there's been an argument in the past about grouping people and putting people in categories. Don't put me in that category. I'm an American. Why do I have to be an African American? I'm an American. Why do I have to be an Asian American? I'm an American. Hispanic. Right. I happen to be a European American, I guess, right? So
says no one ever, though, right?
Yeah, and my point to you, I'm wanting to stay on this objectivity thing. You just said that you don't buy into what I'm saying, that we will be more in an objective situation at the end of this Trump term where I feel we're going to be able to say, yeah, this tariff situation that he's putting in place now, it either worked or it didn't work. This economy is either going to do like he says, which I hope to hell happens, takes and goes to never before seen levels. Not only that, but the country will be stronger. The dollar will be stronger with all the cuts they're making and trying to get the debt lowered versus what we've had in the past, where it's just harder to see for the common working people like ourselves. We're middle-class America, right?
Yep.
I mean, I'm not a factory guy. I'm retired, and so I'm lucky in that regard. And you're an entrepreneur, starting a company. You're not working 9 to 5, grind job. So we're not in that category. But still, I think we're going to have, and the average American citizen is going to have a much better idea of whether or not this guy did what he said he was going to do, and the country's better off, or he failed or did not live up to, and the country is less better off. I'm willing to I'll put $1,000 on it. I'll bet you $1,000 at the end of his second term, we're going to be able to see results from this. They may not be what we want, but there will be there.
Yeah. Who decides what's objective, though, is the problem, right? Because again, what's better for me may be not better for you, or maybe it is, but I'm just not willing to say it actually is, right?
Well, and that's still objective in that if it's not good for you, then you're going to say no. I'm objectively saying that this situation has not worked. There will be people in this country. Don't mishear me. There will be people in this country who are going to say that it did not work. It failed, and I'm worse off. I think the majority are going to say, yeah, this guy has done the right thing and our country is better off because of these policies. So that's my opinion.
Yeah. And I maybe don't disagree with you, but again, just that's not objective then, right? And that's where I'm like, I think objectively what will happen, right? But then people's perception of what happened, right? You and I can watch the exact same video, and that's the objective, like that's what objectively is there for us to then comprehend, right? And then for us, then even just talking about what our comprehension is of the video, like what we saw, what we witnessed.
That's subjective.
Right.
I see your point. And that's true. Yeah, I can see where you're going with that. I just, To me, I'm categorizing it as it will be very clear. It will be more clear than we've ever had clarity-wise in the past from in my lifetime at least, from a president.
So one other comment,
and a political group, a political movement, whatever.
One other comment I want to make, which I thought was great to keep in mind with our stock market conversation of, if you just sit and forget, a 4-year blip, as bad as it may be, if you hold and you have the time to hold, you're not at the end of your life, keep it in, and you'll get past the blip that we've seen, and maybe we can also show the viewers this image as well. So that little blip at the end is the panic that everyone has had over the last couple of weeks with Trump in office.
Yeah.
But ignore all of this. Yet the stock market is more than I don't know. Let's see, that's 32,000. Roughly 45,000. So, not doubled, but that's incalculable.
Well, when you look at a chart like that, right? Yeah. It's all based on the time frame at the bottom, the time going across. Because if you extend that chart out, another 20, 30, 40 years, it's going to change, right?
Right.
But looking at that chart right there at that time frame, what one does, or what I do, is you put a point. Take the cursor if you can. Point to the lowest, the furthest left. There. All right, you start there, and then you draw a line from there to where it ends, and it's up there.
Straight line.
Yep, a straight line. So forget about the squiggle in the middle. Like, so if you drew a straight line, you would see a solid quote unquote uptrend. It's an uptrend.
Absolutely.
So that just shows you the power of our system, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the stock market of America. Investing in our country in being a stock person and investing in mutual funds and things like that. Nothing sophisticated.
Right.
Don't try. I wouldn't encourage anybody to try to be a stock guy unless you train for it and spend all your time doing that. But that point of that, what that shows right there is that if you were invested in the market during all that time, the money you started with is worth a lot more.
Well, and I think that is great, but again, it's easy to see those trends go up and look how much money I've made in the stock market over the last couple of decades. But especially if you're not a homeowner already, right? If you look at the difference between the gains you made in the stock market versus the losses by not owning a home, and I know that's not exactly the right way to frame it, as a loss of not owning a home. But the price increase again from just 2021, the start of 2021 to the middle of 2023, there was a price increase of the average home in America from 215,000 ish to over 420, or about $420,000. So in 2.5 years, right? Who is having those sort of gains, in the stock market? Obviously, if you have millions upon millions of dollars in the stock market, you're making gains like that, because what the average return on a 10-year basis, just like an index fund or just directly investing in the S&P, 10%, and you're lucky?
I don't know what it is. If you're in the S&P 500, I would think it's probably 10 to 12, 11, 10,
and
11, 12.
I think it's actually been underperforming over the last decade or two, and it's 8 or 9.
I don't know what it is. I used to be an S&P 500 index investor, and I'm not now. But that's a guy your age. I'm a lot older than you and Brian, but I don't have any children. But if I envy guys who do, people who do, and can talk to that young child at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15, and tell them, when you get 17, when you become eligible, 18 years old, to start a job, even if you're cutting grass like I did for years and years as a youngster, right, in my neighborhood, you should take a certain portion of everything you make and boom, invest it for the long haul and forget about it. If a young person does that, and I would recommend going into the S&P 500 index fund, you do that. If they do that and then they go on and get a job and, do like what most people do in this country, get a job and go to work or whatever. If you do that, and by the time you're 40, 45 years old, you will, historically, the way the market has performed, you're going to be in a very good situation.
Right.
Overall.
Much better than not, right?
much better than if you don't do that.
Right.
If you don't do that and you just spend the money, or you invest it in a different way, I think that the chances of you, at least this is my understanding, based. I'm no economist and I'm no financial planner or anything like that, but if you disagree with what I'm saying, ask a certified financial person about the value of indexing into the S&P 500 starting at 18 years old and doing it religiously for every paycheck you receive, no matter what you're doing, for 40 years. And ask that person, do you think that would be a wise investment strategy for the common working, non-sophisticated investor, which is 99% of all the people in this country, or more than 99%.
Not wanting to put in the thought.
If you get a hot shot guy who's a financial, stockbroker, they might say, "Oh, well, why would you want to do that when you could invest in my fund over here?" Or this. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just dollar cost averaging in every month. You know how I feel about how powerful that is. So.
Yeah, no, I think that is very powerful. But again, so many people, when that's kind of all of their eggs are in the stock market basket, right? You see a situation like this and some people handle it better than others. Again, we've both seen firsthand someone not really taking to it well. And I think obviously, we have something like Social Security in place of this country. I think that's another, basket that most people just rely on, right? That they put all their eggs in. Like, hey, I'm going to have this, there for me at the, end of my career when I go to retire. And I'm not saying that, you shouldn't have, thought about that as, there for you when you go to retire. But to rely on it, that just seems like, kind of counter to the whole, especially liberal ideal, presented by John F. Kennedy. Ask what you can do for your government, not what your government can do for you. And I know it's been worded other.
You say government. I say he said country.
Yeah, I think it's been said both ways, but I am like 99% sure that I've seen him in a speech say specifically government. And again, in the same way that I might use
I have never heard him say government. It's always been country. I have never heard him say, that's not what you can do for your government.
It was off to me as well. It was
I wonder if that was doctored, what you saw.
I really don't think so.
Really?
Yeah.
And you say you've seen it, you've heard it both ways?
Yes. And I always was very familiar with it and ask what you can do for your country.
Yeah. I've just never heard him. I never heard it. Yeah. He may have, and he may have said that several times and may have said use the government. Yeah. I have not seen that footage, but anyway.
I would die for it, but again, it would probably take a few moments. But
so we've covered a lot of things here. This objectivity thing, I see your point about, what is objective, right?
Right.
And there's definitely going to be different opinions about it. And so I guess that is subjective in nature. I don't know how I can word it better. I feel that it's going to be it will be the most clear presidency that I've seen in my lifetime, that either the policies put forth by this president and this administration, they either worked and worked well, or they did not work as well, or they were failure. And I feel that's going to be clear for me to see. That's going to be clear. And I feel for the majority of the people in this country, or more of the majority than not, they will feel the same way, that it will be clear to them.
I think
despite what all the talking heads say on MSNBC and Fox and Newsmax, all the online people they're going to know, hey, I got more money. I'm making more money in my job. The cost of eggs and milk and gas is the lowest I've seen in a long time. Housing prices, there are plenty of jobs. I can get hired. I'm working. My deadbeat nephew who could never find a job is now working. That kind of stuff. People are going to feel in their core. Right. It's either going to work or it's not. That's kind of what I mean. Does that sit well with you, or do you still question the objectivity argument?
Yeah, this is something. I still want to say. I think it's nice to say, hey, it would be great if everyone objectively, thinks about it that way. I don't think that will be the case, no matter how great it is. I think there are just still so many people that, Trump could, turn water into wine.
And
right?
they're going to say, that's not facts.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
Well,
like,
absolutely.
oh, this was,
do you think the majority of the people in the country will question it, or do you think that the majority will, based on what he's doing now, and this is all opinion and all gut.
Based off what he's doing now, I do think a majority of the Americans that care to make a better life for themselves will have more opportunity to do so, and they'll be better off as a result.
If he did turn water into wine, if you're not questioning it, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, but what I was also gonna touch on, I think beyond the objectivity of like the economic situation, what we need more is people to reclaim purpose in their lives, reclaim an identity. I think so many people, as much as like they're lost and scared, from a financial perspective, it's almost like we forgot what it means to be an American, right? It's like that's almost looked at as like a bad term, nowadays, right? Kind of like, because it's like nationalistic. Well, that's kind of like Nazism, right? Being so proud and like
nationalism versus globalism,
right?
And that globalism, not to cut you off, but one of the big reasons why I feel that the Trump administration is doing what they're doing and why they have hit a chord with so many people in this country, they're turning away from globalism, right?
Absolutely.
And globalization. I think that we did the globalization effort started with NAFTA, and we've had 30 plus years. I guess 30 years or so of that. And we've done well. Our country is strong and all, but I just feel we have $37 trillion in debt, man, right now. And that is a really scary, and I'm no economist, I'm not trying to be, but everything I've ever read and any interview I've ever heard with any economist talking about that debt, they've all, and I've said this before, but they've all said they don't know how it's going to end, but it won't end well. So we really need, and part of what Trump is doing now is to address that, to start trying to figure out ways to bring that down. And this DOGE and finding waste and, fraud, abuse, whatever you want to call it, overspending for stuff you don't need or want is a good place, in my mind, a good place to start with that kind of thing, trying to lower the debt or trying to fix this. So, I don't know. I lost where I was going, but
I think, the key is being pro-America over the rest of the world is not inherently bad as it's been made out to seem. Well, we got to take care of all the other people in the world, not at the expense of the American people, right?
Yeah.
Start off taking care of yourself, then start taking care of the people around you, take care of the people maybe in your city, your state, then, in your country. And then, hey, you know what? We have so much of an abundance of wealth, that we can start investing in all of these funds. But I think we were at a time, in that position for a little bit of time, pre-World War I, after World War I. I think we really got caught with our pants down by letting Britain default on their loans. And, that's when Winston, not Winston Churchill, what's his name? Woodrow Wilson.
That's World War I.
Yeah. Post World War I, introduced income tax. And so it's like, instead of Britain paying for the reparations of World War I, guess who's paying for it? The American people, right? And I think that's really what kind of started, and again, one of many contributing factors into the Great Depression, right? And then, of course, start to come out of that really not until like very, very strongly until World War II, where we get all of our potential production capabilities, geared towards, these wartime efforts. And then, of course, after World War II, we learned from our past mistake with Britain in World War I, made them, collect the gold from all their citizens if we were going to come and, support Britain against their...
FDR did that here. You had to turn your gold in the U.S., too.
During World War II?
Yeah. That was one of the things that the government wanted to collect all the gold, and if you had gold, you were supposed to turn it in. I think you got paid for it, of course, with worthless printed
Paper,
bills.
right.
But I don't want to go into what you're talking about is a very complicated, and I don't have the expertise to. We can banter about it, but not only after World War II, we not only learned from our mistakes from World War I and whatnot, but our cities weren't torn all to hell like Europe was, and Great Britain's.
And that's where I'm
they
saying
had so much.
We
cost.
had this abundance of wealth after we recovered from the debts that we had to pull ourselves out of, from World War I. And it's like, now that we have all this prosperity in our homeland, our production centers are larger than they ever have before. We're taking all of these wartime efforts and just refocusing it towards the commercial and consumer industries. And we have all these extra spoils. Let's go be the policemen of the world, right? Let's go take care of the world. And then over the, subsequent decades, those funds, run out. And all of a sudden, we're in the situation we are. But again, that's all brand new as of January this year that, we've been in a $36 trillion debt, running at a deficit now that all of our interest payments, like we're paying more quarterly than I think our yearly interest payments. Or I'm getting that wrong, but it's something like
I'm thinking we're paying $2 trillion a year in interest is what I'm thinking.
It's definitely over $1 trillion. I think somewhere $1.5 trillion.
And what I've said about $1 trillion. People don't realize how much it is, crazy, man. It's just it's
fantasy.
It's incomprehensible how much money we're talking here, and it's almost. I think it's more of an Excel spreadsheet exercise. It's a math equation to put it into real terms.
But again, even $1 billion for most people, because most people still, again, aren't really living in the real world. Where it's like, again, obviously, all of us would love to just have $1 million, pop into our bank accounts, pop into our hands, appear in our lives, but it's so easy to think, if I just had $1 million, all of my real problems would be sorted out. And, not to say that $1 million would have ever solved all of your problems, but,
it certainly helps. It can help.
Right. And it's not the same that in the way that, it's 1,000 millions to get to $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
So we are far closer in lifestyles and our purchasing power to someone worth $100 million than that person worth $100 million is worth $1 billion.
$1 million billion is $1 trillion, right?
I think so, because it's 1,000 thousands in a million, 1,000 millions in a billion, and then so it would.
I think it's 1 million billion is $1 trillion. I think it's a million. It's 1 million billion. It's crazy, man. It's
1 trillion is equal to 1,000 billion.
1,000 billion. Okay, 1,000 billion.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that. I don't know why it took me. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Or,
okay.
1 million millions, though.
Yeah, yes. It goes up. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a lot of money, and it's such a large number that it's an exercise. It's a math exercise in the mind more than. Can you imagine? I mean, how much you could fill this neighborhood up 10 feet high, and it wouldn't even come close with $100 bills or whatever. I mean, it's an incredible amount of money. One other quick point that I want to just make to what you're saying about after World War II and how we became the policeman, so to speak, and how we want to help all these other countries. Yep. One big thing that was different then is the threat of communism. So the U.S. wanted to help rebuild the West so that they could embrace capitalism and not fall prey to socialism and because of communism, the Iron Curtain comes up, and that mentality was strong in the East. And so that's one of the reasons I think why the U.S. did what it did. But we won the Cold War, and we beat communism from that on the continent of Europe for the most part.
Yeah, so now we don't have to worry about communism anymore. Sure.
Well, I'm talking about European communism and Bolshevism or whatever coming from Russia. I'm not talking about Chinese communism. Still, China is a threat much bigger, I feel, than Russia ever was, because, well, hell, there's over 1 billion of those people. There's so many people there. They're so big. And if that economy ever, you talk about awakening a sleeping giant, and we're paying the price now, I feel, I'm talking real broad here, we're paying the price for, doing business with the devil. I mean,
Right.
like I said, I read an article in Time magazine years ago. It talked about how there were estimated to be about 130 million people in China who never used a toothbrush. Question, is Procter and Gamble, that makes, all these products for bathroom use and whatnot, are they interested in that market? It's half the size of the population of the United States. Of course they are.
Right.
So the U.S. embraced doing business with China. Now China's got a middle class coming up. They're not riding to work on a bicycle anymore. They're
All
getting
electric
cars.
Yep.
And if that country were to, if they mobilize and if they ever overtake us, we're in a world of a threat. And this is another reason why I feel the Trump administration is doing the right thing. They're keeping a closer eye on China, and they're not an ally to us. We need to be aware of that this country poses probably the biggest threat to our nation since Second World War and since the Soviet Union by far. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and round out the show.
Absolutely.
All right, so picking up where we left off, we were talking about the impact of globalization versus nationalization from a foreign policy, economic policy perspective, and what that means for us as Americans versus what it means for the rest of the world, this civilian populace, right? And I want to pull up a video from one of our previous presidents, President Obama. He had his first public long-form speaking engagement for quite some time here recently, published 3 days ago. He went to Hamilton College. So I figured, I'd love to see what's going on, not just from, Donald Trump, who's president now. Love to get Barack Obama's opinion. Probably won't agree with, some of it, but, certainly an influential figure nonetheless that I would like to hear from. But
And just real quick, you said we're contrasting globalization from nationalism, not nationalization.
Yes.
Because nationalization means the government's is taking control of it. So we're talking about nationalism versus a globalization, or globalism versus nationalism. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for correcting me there. I guess there is an element that obviously we want to work with the world around us, right? Many of our components, as we were discussing, going into our drones, into our cars, our consumer goods, even if they're made here, are coming from other countries, right? So there is an interdependence that I think there's really no way of working around to, some degree. Obviously, you don't want to be totally reliant on one country for, one, entire category of goods, whether it's clothing, whether it's agriculture, whether it's semiconductors, you don't want to have, again, all of your eggs in one basket. And I think by and large, we put all of our eggs in one basket, or in very, very, very few baskets, right? Especially from the technology perspective with China. One other tidbit before I pull up this video with former President Barack Obama, talking with our neighbor previously, who made a comment that a lot of people bring up, including myself, and in various contexts. I often like to bring it up, like, no one, if we started producing iPhones here in America, no one would want to purchase them, because it's not like, hey, you're spending $1,500 instead of $1,000 on an iPhone. Try $3,000 to $4,000 versus $1,000 for an iPhone, and maybe even more than that. And again, the conversation that I'm referring to a week ago, the night a week ago, He mentioned something about, like, you don't want a $3,000 iPhone or iPhone made here in America. And it's like, you're arguing to my point, especially when there's an attack on me basically not caring about, the average person, the person around the world even. And I just found it awfully funny from someone saying that, we're so reliant on China, like basically we're fine with slaves as long as they're not within our borders.
Sure.
And
Yep.
to me, it's like, no, I would rather have a more expensive, consumer product if that means, American is getting purpose, and livelihood out of it, right? A good job. I mean, even I remember growing up, there was this show, Undercover Boss, on like CBS or something like that. And Fender, the music company, right? They had amps, I think Zildin, or I don't know how to pronounce, do you know the
amplifier?
Well, there's Fender for like the amps, right? That they were making amplifiers here. There's another big amplifier company that I think was also featured, and maybe I'm Polk, maybe, but there was also, I think, Zildin, the like cymbal manufacturer that starts with a Z, if you're familiar with them.
I think it's Zelgen.
Okay.
Zelgen.
And I just recall, there's a lot of those factory jobs, producing technology, that sure, were you going to, die a multimillionaire, if that was your only source of income, probably not. But did it give you purpose in life? Did it make you feel good that, hey, someone else is using a product I had a hand in making, That's, to me, at least, and I find that's the case with a lot of people that, I work with, that, beyond the economic, sort of trade-offs that we're making with globalization, we're also making the trade-offs from like losing, again, what it means to be an American, losing the sense of purpose, from like, what value do I bring to the world, right? And if that's stripped away because, hey, well, someone else, we can force to do it for $2 an hour, so you're obviously better than that, right? Well, again, that goes into where it's not really a free market in really any case, because there's other countries, well, hey, maybe this is an opportunity we can provide for our people, and we're going to subsidize it to undercut, what's being done in America. And so
your argument, if you don't mind me interjecting, it sounds idealistic, and you can say that you don't mind paying $1,500 or $3,000 for an iPhone.
I don't. Yeah,
which would normally be $1,000 or whatever. You can say that, and the fact that it's made by American hands and American people are getting a paycheck and benefiting from it. That sounds great, but for the people in this country who are struggling to get by, it does make a difference. So that's the argument against, I think,
right,
what you're saying about.
But would you rather have a house over your head with that's yours or closer to being yours, and no iPhone or a $3,000 iPhone, or would you rather have a $1,000 iPhone but can't afford housing? Right. And that's a very extreme case, right? I'm not saying it's either iPhone or, housing, but again, that's the trade-off that we're making. For cheap consumer goods, we're building the middle class of other countries so they can get more affordable housing and transportation. And those are the real costs that actually matter. And again, I wouldn't be happy with a $3,000 iPhone. I don't even use an iPhone right now, given, the same sort of manufacturing practices are used across most phones.
What do you
of course,
use, Android?
Yeah, this is an Android, a Google phone. Probably still made in China, but then you get Samsungs, of course, made in Korea. A lot of people don't think about this, but there's quasi-slavery in South Korea still. I mean, again, it's nice to think that like South Korea, oh yeah, it's super civilized, first world country. I mean, there's obviously parts of America that, rightfully so wouldn't be described as first world, right? But again, that's really my point. If we have so many of these areas within our own borders, how about let's give those people a purpose, and over time, again, I think we'll find ways to be more competitive on a global scale. Should, we start off in a position like we are right now where, yeah, we're like from the drone perspective, not able to make the drone, like the same drone at a comparable price to what you can make it over in China. But over time, we're going to continue to find more efficiencies to drive down that cost, you know,
Right.
make our products better. And
one of those efficiencies might be using more robotics, right? And that's one of the biggest. It's my understanding that the biggest threat to labor, assembly line type labor in this country, more jobs were taken away by technology than outsourcing to foreign countries. That's my understanding. I may be wrong on that, but so technology, I mean, if we move plants, I'm kind of taking the other side here and playing devil's advocate, but based on your argument is idealistic in nature. I mean, if we have more and more manufacturing plants brought to the United States, and the companies are able to produce these products here, but they can't compete with what we used to have, they're gonna innovate, right? And what are they going to do? Find more creative ways to use people? Or are they going to find more use of technology, especially AI coming in the picture? They're going to use technology and AI, and they're going to find ways to get rid of the jobs. So that's what I think one of the arguments against what Trump is doing and how it may not work out. Again, we're going to find out after 3 years or 4 years. We're going to be able to say it either worked or it didn't.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think that could also be perceived as idealistic in the sense that, like, hey, all the robots are going to take jobs. No, they're just going to make the requirements different for new jobs. Right.
Well, that's true too. In other words, instead of people working on the assembly line, the jobs will be working on the technology.
On the robot that's managing the assembly line.
So, but there's definitely an argument. I don't know if the scale will balance out to where it'll be the same amount of people, because if you got people on the assembly line and all these people are no longer needed and there's robots, it will probably take a lot fewer people to maintain those robots than it would be for those people, the original people, to work on the assembly line.
I think if we're at that point where it really is like, hey, the robots have taken all of like the jobs that, are really just, we need a person in this seat or to fill this role, and, we can pay them any sort of like hourly rate, wage, or, a decent salary. But, that's a position that we want to get automated by a robot. I think by the time we really, reach a saturation point there, I don't think it'll be a problem. I mean, I think beyond what we already have from a labor market problem, right? I think there's already a lot of people that just don't want to work, and I don't think that's going to change, right? And so I don't think there's going to be this like brand new like influx of like all of a sudden jobs are gone overnight, because of robots taking over
Right.
people's positions.
I don't think it'll happen overnight, but I think a major concern about U.S. manufacturing coming back to this country, and if we can't produce the products as efficiently as they could be produced by slave labor in China or wherever, we're going to do what we've always done in this country, which is innovate. And when we innovate, we're going to use technology, because that's the way, that's how innovation occurs in this country, and the technology will be replacing human jobs.
And so I think that opens up better jobs for people, and then it opens up more business opportunities for people as well.
Definitely better jobs, better paying jobs, because you're no longer just sitting on an assembly line putting the square cube into the square, into the square hole, and the round peg in the round peg. In the round hole, you got to be a computer scientist, essentially. You got to be, versed in computers and technology. So you'll probably need a computer science degree. You won't, but I'm just saying, it's not going to be a manual labor job anymore. So the jobs will be well paying, but there'll be a lot fewer.
Well, again, I think that's where, again, a lot of the jobs are going, more manual labor, right? Again, it's easy to think that, like, hey, in a very controlled environment, of course, you can replace jobs more easily with robots. But when you're talking about, like, the stereotypical trade jobs that require manual labor, there's only so far that you can go to automate, Of course, building a house, you have even 3D printers that, are building.
You're going to need carpenters and plumbers and electricians and masons. You're going to need those people to do that.
The key is we need more people focused on producing in this country more than consuming in this country. And we've had that flip flop for way too long. And I think that's, it is tough. I mean, again, life is never said it was going to be easy, right? But I think, again, from the perspective of having more opportunity in this country to either get a good paying job, one that gives you purpose as well as a good income, or start a business of your own, I think is going to continue to get greater and greater through this administration. But I don't think we're going to see a loss of jobs over bringing back manufacturing. I think we're just going to see those jobs evolve, and then new types of businesses are going to, pop up as a result.
I'm of the belief that these tariffs and this rebalancing of the trade situation that we have been involved in for so long, and that Trump is changing, it's going to make, and I'm not talking about just the tariff, but the rebalancing of the trade situation is going to make those products that we've been buying overseas, it's going to make it more fair to where they're not going to be able to produce them overseas as cheaply. And Trump is in a way forcing a rebalancing such that manufacturing in this country hopefully
makes more sense.
Will be able to work.
Well, and that's again,
and you won't have to spend $3,000 for an iPhone.
Right.
You might spend more, but hopefully it won't be instead of $1,000, $3,000 or $4,000.
And people got to remember, automotive manufacturing has obviously had its problems back in 2008, for the big automotive manufacturers outside of Ford. Obviously, it was still a big problem for Ford, but Ford was able to weather the storm. But I mean, we've clearly been able to be competitive in one of the most difficult fields of manufacturing, right? In the automotive space, right? How competitive the consumer automotive space is. And that's still with we're selling cars in Europe, and despite the economic, barriers that are put in place, one thing that, again, Trump opened up my eyes to, again, a very specific instance of, we have to go through just arbitrary test in Germany selling a car where, German cars, they don't have to go through the same test. So it's not necessarily, a financial burden that's put on the German consumer, or put on the American company in the form of the German consumer having to pay more for what would otherwise be a car that's only equivalent to something cheaper domestically, right? But in this very specific case, they have to drop a bowling ball or a bowling ball size weight on the top of American cars. If it makes a dent, can't sell it in our market. None of their domestic cars have to go through that test. And so that's, again, a point to what you're saying. As much as it is trying to, make the dollars and cents add up, it's just making it more of a equal trade. If you're selling your cars in our market and, we're only charging a 4% tariff, but you're charging us a 25% tariff, as well as adding on these regulations that we can't sell our cars, that's not going to fly anymore.
Right. And that's part of what Trump is doing. Right. And so maybe it's going to be that manufacturing in this country is doable again. And the reason it has
to be an option.
And the reason it's doable is because of the trade atmosphere that has been in existence. And Trump has been talking about that recently. He's like, no other president's had the guts to do what I'm doing. This should have been done years ago. And he's blaming all the past administrations for allowing this to have gone on so long. Now here we are at $37 trillion debt, and
happened overnight, all thanks to him. I'm kidding, right? But that's people are actually believing that with the
past 20 years we've seen a massive. I remember when Bill Clinton balanced the budget. Can you believe that, man? We had a zero. They had a press conference, he and Al Gore, I remember, and they had this big whiteboard, and they had Clinton took a dry erase pencil, and it was a dollar sign. He had a big zero. We balanced the budget, and that was a cool situation. I can't believe that was 30 years ago or so. And here we are 30 years later, and we have this astronomical, unfathomable amount of money that is owed the American debt from the federal government. Unsustainable. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to cause problems. And again, I'm no economist, and don't ever pretend I would never want to be. But it to me,
Yeah, 'cause
all indications say that it's going to end bad.
I just find it funny in like the same way that money managers, are very like, obviously there's the exceptions like the Ray Dalio types, or you could even argue Warren Buffett to some degree is like a money manager, of some sense. But other than that, like it just seems to me like, why are you not like this notable, big figure if you're so good at, managing money? And I kind of look at it in that same sense from an economist, if you understand like the inner workings of the economy so well, that we should just trust your opinion over, just conversations that, make sense to the everyday person. And that's, again, going back, kind of jumping around a little bit. I got yelled at for, well, you don't understand history, and it was because of the tariffs, going into in the 1930s that caused the Great Depression. You idiot, and it's like, okay, if you understand the history so well to be able to call me an idiot, then in simple terms, explain what happened. And I feel like so many times, whether it's people trusting these quote unquote experts in their field or the experts themselves, they will just rest on their laurels of the label that they've been, given or have earned, as opposed to actually just communicating their understanding and letting the idea speak for itself. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Which is kind of what we're about,
right.
What this podcast is about.
Right.
We're not claiming to be experts on any of this stuff. I mean, we're not.
Right.
But we're gonna have, and we're gonna disagree, but we're gonna do it very civilly, and that's what we need in this country. And maybe that's one thing that I hope comes out of this podcast is maybe we can communicate that, we need to be discussing and we need to be disagreeing in this country, but we've got to be civil toward one another. And we got to realize we're all in this shit together.
Right. It's not right versus left. It's America. It really isn't. It's America versus the world. If you want to really group it, section us off in groups. And again, I don't even think we should be.
That's nationalistic. You're a Nazi.
Yeah.
For thinking that way. Yeah.
Right. But and that's what's crazy. It's better to think about hating, or opposing other Americans than it is like, hey, come on, other Americans, let's all work together,
Mm-hmm. It's our land, it's our country, it's our culture, it's our country, it's our land, it's our founding fathers, it's our ancestors and our progeny going forward. It's our country. And I don't want to see a world government, real quickly, the Bible talking about the book of Revelation and how it talks about, there will be one world government, one currency, and it will ultimately fall into the hands of the wrong person. Like all human beings, we are flawed. And, I'm getting on a little soapbox here, but as a human being, this is why I hate socialism, and which leads to terrible things, because the idea of socialism, we're all going to share. It's going to be great. We're all going to be the same, and we're all going to share our wealth. And all. This is wonderful in theory. The problem is that you have human beings involved in that, and we suffer from things called sin, if you want to call it that. But we're greedy, we're lustful, we have jealousy, we're lazy, all these things. It's part of being human,
right.
And in order to fight against that, you have to have the system I feel that we have, which is I feel it's the best system in the world: checks and balances, representative government, etc. So. I don't want to go off on a tangent on that, but just to say that we are flawed as human beings, and all humans have this, some more, I guess, more than others. There are better people and evil people in the world, of course, but we got to watch human beings. We got to watch, because we're flawed.
Right, and something we've touched on in a previous conversation, not in this setting, but where you get anyone like Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, especially like I think the most apt analogy would be a Barack Obama, is if Barack Obama came out and made a statement along the lines, I can either take care of this country or I can raise two outstanding daughters, the world would be like losing their mind, or, a big part of the population would be losing their mind.
Hello.
No.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, he's fine.
Are you hearing it? Are you hearing it? Oh, okay. I'll back it down. Sorry.
Sorry to anyone that is as offended as Brian was from Jim's chewing gum. I doubt that's going to be the case. It's just more noticeable for him in headphones. So, yeah, there you go, Brian. Let's jump over, and then I can come back to that thought if I can remember it. But in any case, I want to...
I'm sorry, Brian, would you please do me a favor? Would you grab my water, please? Yep. Sorry.
All right. Yeah. We'll get Jim a little bit of water and basically just have a video of a recent Trump interview from, I think, 3 weeks ago now. And it's on Fox News, so yeah, I guess it's fake news. But again, just listen to what Donald Trump has to say here. And I, made the comment again about a week ago that obviously an opinion, no way to objectively measure this. I think Donald Trump is the president who has cared most about the American people and the outcome of the American people relative to their the rest of the world and their position relative to the rest of the world, more so than any other president since JFK. Mm-hmm. And I think the statement is one of many that he makes. And then again, it's not just talk is cheap, right? But again, we'll see. I think he is on a very great path this term that, again, we haven't seen the likes of any other term. You could argue, he had similar effects in his first term. I don't think so. Again, I think he was kind of underwater there, not knowing what he's doing.
He learned a lot.
He did. And I think he admitted to it in a way that a lot of people won't give him credit for because they like to think Trump's not that type of person. He would never admit any wrongdoing. And I get in a political position that he's in, especially with how intense the spotlight is. You admit you're wrong, and people are running with that and like, oh, they're not fit, But in any case, Barack Obama, I was making the comment that if you were to make the comment that if he couldn't raise like his daughter or, had to take care of the country, people would be up in arms, kind of losing their minds about that. And yet, Theodore Roosevelt like publicly, made that comment when he was president. I can either take care of my daughter and, control her, or I can take care of this country, right? And I think if you were to get that from a modern politician, that's the very swift beginning to the end of their career, right? Mm-hmm. And again, obviously, I think Trump has been an exception to, those comments where typically it would be the end of someone. He can just, what is it, water off the duck's back, something like that.
So this is from the Oval Office. When was this?
Yes, about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Do you ever call any former president? Do you call any of the former presidents?
Not much.
No.
A lot was made out of the fact that I got along very well with President Obama, right? You saw that.
Yeah, it seems so.
I can, I can do things that a lot of people.
You were friends with pretty much all of them.
I just didn't like the job they did. Because it's not about friends. I didn't like the job they did. They let our country down.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
To me, that's like, it's not like, again, to me, that was not him trying to get a soundbite. That was just his honest off-the-cuff take. Like, how do you explain that conversation with Obama? I thought you didn't agree with him, but now it seems like you're all buddy-buddy with him and kind of trying to portray this narrative of, like, which is it? Are you friends with him or not? And like you said, brilliant answer in my opinion. It's not about being friends with him. It's this, I'm here to do a job for this country, and I think they've let our country down. And so many people are like, well, Trump is narcissistic. He's all about himself. I'm sorry. That's what, in my opinion, what we should all want. At the very least, that's what I want out of a politician. I want someone that's self-serving. Again, an American, right? From the start, they're serving Americans. But without it, then you get lip service. You get pandering to what you think the people want, right? And you're never going to be able to appeal to everyone anyway, right? That's kind of like what I was getting at with the objective truth, that no matter how objective, those events, as they unfolded is true, people's perception of what happened, is not going to be the same across the board. And I just find that, that also holds true in a situation like this, that it's not about being friends, it's about doing what you think is right for your country, having like your own vision, within the context of a business and sticking with it. And obviously you can use that same sort of terminology with the country as well, but really doing what you think is best, obviously like pulling in, all the different opinions of like your cabinet or your advisors, your team members that you're working with. But at the end of the day, like you have to represent your self-interest. You can't be, hey, I represent the American people, because what the hell does that really mean, right? Representing the American people.
And if you try to be all things to everybody, you're wind up being nothing, to anyone, so to speak. And another way of saying what Trump just said there, and what I think you just said, I could summarize it real quick. For him, it's business. It's not about, whether he likes somebody or not. He even said that I personally feel that Trump doesn't have a problem with any of these people personally. It is business. And you heard what he just said. He didn't like the job they did. Right. And as we've seen, go back and I challenge everybody to go and Google the David Letterman interviews and I don't know if he was on Leno, probably, yeah. 30 years ago. And he's saying the same thing today that he said on these in these interviews. And to me, that consistency, it's another reason why I support him and supported him. And I think a lot of America did. We need to see some consistency. It's objective, and objectively speaking, I feel that Trump believes today what he believed 30 years ago. Objectively, that's subjective, my view on it, I guess. But to me, the evidence is pretty clear. So, and I think you're in the same boat.
Yeah, again, I've watched a lot of those older interviews. I've watched a lot of, especially recently, either when I'm not like actively watching them, listening to in the office, and sometimes during drone production, the 2016 Republican primary debates. Again, not as old as like some of the clips that we're referring to from talk show interviews that he's done, where again, he's fairly consistent with his messaging for literally 4 or 5 decades now.
Unheard of.
However, again,
for a politician.
And obviously there's going to be places where his position has evolved or changed over time. And I don't think either of us want to like misconstrue like someone having evolving, changing opinion for being like a flip-flopper, right? I think there's a very clear difference. Sometimes putting your finger on, well, was this a change of heart, or was this a very real, like I had information that's like, led me to think, oh no, this is actually the right move forward. And that was something that I found kind of funny. Marco Rubio was called out for in the 2016 primaries. It was basically something to do with asylum or something similar for immigrants. And it might have even been for like family members that were already here. And basically he got called out for, lying, where he was at a recent event that this lady was at that was asking a question to all the Republican primary candidates. It was clear to the viewer already that he had done a 180, even if he had not watched, that event that she was talking about, just in the way that he's kind of trying to talk around, like his position changing or whatever. And Donald Trump, he was called out earlier for basically being hypocritical because he's hired, people from Poland or whatever for, to the tunes of tens of thousands of people for a project back in like the late 80s
that may
or
not
whatever.
have been citizens.
Yeah.
He got cheap labor.
Right. Yeah. And so he was like, something 4 decades ago. And, Trump made a kind of funny retort about, I guess we need a, what's the statute of limitations on lies now? Do we need a statute of or maybe Marco Rubio had said that because, Trump was like his situation 40 years ago, owned up to it immediately, not trying to hide it from anyone there, watching the Republican primary debate. And then, Marco Rubio, like Trump was like, dude, you got caught. Basically just say it. And like, yeah, hey, I was trying to, win. But at that point, again, saying that you lied, as blatantly as that case would have been, probably not the best political move either. But
well, if a person has strong beliefs about something and they're not willing to change that belief based on time going by and reevaluating their stance and position,
right,
then that's not human either. I mean, it's
right.
human nature, and it's positive that we change our views on things that we might believe solidly about something, and then as we get more educated and learn more, we realize that viewpoint was flawed or whatever. I mean, this is one of the main arguments Elon Musk has said about Donald Trump, or J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance spoke against Donald Trump at first, and his response when he's called on that, his response is, I didn't really understand who Trump was. Now I understand him and know him better. And I think he sees that Trump is sincere. And I think you and I both are in alignment that, and the thing that we like, one of the things we like about Trump is I think that he's sincere in his belief to do what's best for this country.
And that does not mean to say every single word that comes out of his mouth is truth either, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he talks in almost parables sometimes. And
hyperbole, exaggeration. Sometimes just straight up getting numbers wrong or facts wrong.
He's human. And he is, does he have an ego? Is he narcissistic? I would say
absolutely.
And for any people, this country, I mean, we're a country of narcissistic people. Our culture is narcissistic by nature. All these, I mean, women go out of their way every day to make themselves look a certain way, to be desired. And men as well. We're all narcissists. That's part of being human too. Is you can't get rid of that narcissism. There's some leaders that have less of it than others. But is Trump flawed? I would say, I'm a history major, right, from school, and when I remember one of my professors saying at Carolina that most great men are flawed, meaning most great leaders are flawed. And if you're going to lead, you're not going to be popular with everybody, and you're not going to be everybody's, pal, etc. You're going to piss a lot of people off. Has Trump done that? Yeah, he's made a lot of people, isolated a lot of people in this country. I don't want to go down that hole, but to your point, the sincerity that we've seen and the consistency is something unusual, and it's unheard of in a politician to hold core views for 40 years and not be caught flip-flopping on those. And core views of Trump about putting this country first and taking care of our own people has always been, and I think always will remain, one of his primary core beliefs that won't change.
Yeah, I think
he'll never be a globalist, for example. He's going to be
Team America.
Team America, and some people would say he's nationalistic, and that's dangerous and it is to a degree. You have to watch nationalism because it can lead to countries wanting more land and wanting to conquer territories and shit like that. Now we're going back to World War II and before, and we've grown. I think mankind has learned some valuable lessons that too much of a good thing can yield. There's always two sides, right? One of my favorite sayings is, it's a mighty thin slice of ham that only has one side, right? There's two sides to everything. A good thing can become a bad thing,
right? Pretty
much in anything in life. So we got to, with nationalism, it's time, and the pendulum is coming back. But we have to watch it, when people start calling for, like if Trump wanted to invade Greenland, for example, I wouldn't support that, or invade Canada. I wouldn't support that because I don't feel it's our right to go conquer.
We shouldn't go take arms up against someone. Now, again, if we're prospering in such a way that they want to willfully, like the people want to willfully, join our form of government, federal government, as an entity, or many break off into
state.
Or many entities, many states within our republic. I'm not apparently inherently opposed to the idea either. Again, I think if you look back in any point in history when America has been able to expand land, it's been for the better. Again, given America is still a young country, so there's still a lot of history still to be settled. But I think, of course, Greenland, if I've heard a couple members of his cabinet, people close to him in his administration talking about what they think is likely to happen. Greenland will declare their independence from Denmark, and then Trump will come in and make a deal that the people of Greenland won't be able to refuse. We'll see if that.
You're going to make them a deal they can't refuse.
The art of the deal.
So you have Obama up here.
Barack Obama. So again, I had mentioned it's been quite some time since he's been in the public spotlight, and I really appreciate him going out and putting himself out there in this way. He was very, I think, candid about it being quite a while since he's gone out and done any speaking engagements. He's been writing his autobiography, and so he said he's spent a lot of time in his head, essentially, right? And it's very different from going from long form communication via writing to speaking. But beyond that, he was also talking about a lot of what we've touched on throughout this episode, kind of the international order that has been established, especially, post World War II, that we've lived in for, the decades since, and how that's essentially at risk with our current leadership. And I think, again, he did a very good way to really, because I think it's like a liberal college, as most colleges are now. And I hate, again, using that sort of term, but in the sense of there's probably more Trump haters than, I don't want to even say Trump supporters, but I would say there's more Trump haters than Trump supporters on almost every college campus. And I make it that black and white, take out the people that are really not into politics, not inherently for any politician. If you're just, say, people for another politician or against Trump, I think there's more in the against Trump on. And then I mentioned that because I think Obama did a good job to make sure, he was not trying to get the crowd riled up about Trump's awful. He's really kind of giving him a chance.
So he's speaking at Hamilton College.
Yes. And
where are they? I mean, where's
I don't know.
Okay. Real quickly.
Yeah, I think Maryland, but I could be wrong.
The problem I have, when you say liberal, liberal college and whatnot, it's a positive thing.
Yes.
Liberal to me is free thinking and
I'm just looking up.
Not, not aligned with the church, not aligned with, a foundational way of thinking. That to me is liberal.
Yep.
I think the definition of liberal is someone who embraces progressive and change and isn't afraid of that. And so again, that two sides to everything, right?
Right.
I think liberalism founded this country. It was a liberal idea to think that you don't need a monarch ordained by God through divine providence or whatever that's called divine right. It's called the King of England King George was in the position he was in due to divine right, meaning God put him there, right. And how dare you go against him? So we were, I'm sure, viewed as heretics for breaking away from the crown and believing that we can rule ourselves. It was a radical idea at the time. That is true liberalism. The crap we see happening, the anti-Trump and all that stuff, it's been co-opted. Liberalism has been hijacked.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying. It's been hijacked, right. And it's not true. And when I talk about phony liberalism, that's what I'm talking about. I use that a lot. And I may not know what I'm talking about, but that's my belief.
No, I agree. And that's where, again, identity politics has become so pervasive and not for the good of us. It's, again, either, in my opinion, consider yourself an individual and independent, or if you want to be a part of a group, be part of Team America, right? And really, Team People is fine too, but again, I think there's an argument to be made. You got to draw the line somewhere between helping everyone and helping yourself. And I think the best way to do that with the current structure of the world is cut it off at America, right? And then if you want to get more granular, think about your state, think about your county or your city, but
local,
right.
Which is so important. Another thing I'll say real quickly to tie into, and I heard everything you just said, and I agree with it, to tie into my idea on liberalism and whatnot. And I love identity politics. That is a very poignant phrase or labeling. In other words, people who, it's my belief, a lot of people who claim to be liberal, right? They really, if you laid out everything that the left, liberal left is espousing today, I don't believe that a lot of people who claim to be liberal really believe a lot of those things. They want to be associated as a liberal because of what it historically means: open-mindedness, education, the Enlightenment, all that, all liberal in theory and all. But I just don't believe that they're true, that they really believe all the stuff that's being forced down their throat. To be a part of that group, you have to claim that you believe all this stuff. And I saw a sign Tuesday. I was in Decatur, in a very high in Decatur, Georgia, in a very I would say a very high economic neighborhood.
Yeah.
The average cost of the house starts at, I don't know,
Probably
700,000-800,000. Yeah, 700,000-800,000 probably on it. I don't know exactly, but I see at someone's house real close to where I was, and I see a sign, and we see these signs all over this neighborhood. It says, "Keep the immigrants, deport the fascists." That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
Yeah, right.
And that stems from identity politics.
Right. And who's deciding the fascist? And again, you can make the argument like, well, obviously, keep the immigrants. There's very few people that are saying, hey, get rid of all immigrants, right? Even Donald Trump, he's been very outspoken about not wanting to take a lot of these actions that he's taking as far as deporting, people, obviously with the criminals, he's very outspoken about really wanting to do that. But as far as like the very nuanced, gray area situations where families may get separated, that's not a decision anyone really wants to make as far as breaking a family apart. But when it comes down to like, we got to make laws for everybody, some people are going to get caught up on the side that they don't want to get caught up on. And it sucks that that's got to happen. But I think it's a lot easier to make the claim that, hey, what an immigrant is versus what a fascist is, right? But because, again, fascist, like you're saying, liberal is what I'm getting at, just gets co-opted, right? It's so easy to call someone a fascist and a Nazi and then
because you disagree with them,
right? Lose sight of what that really means. And the same way we're talking about the whole Cold War with communism. That's why I don't think the situation post World War II with the whole communism, Red Scare movement is all that different, because now we're seeing the same thing with Nazism, neo-Nazism. And if you're against this international order, you're pro-America, to your point. You're nationalistic, you're Nazi,
policy or abortion or what have you. There was an agreement in terms of how our societies and our politics needed to function. One of the remarkable things about America is that we did the same to a great degree for the world. I mean, all of you have grown up in an international order that was largely created by the United States and its allies after World War II, out of the rubble that
really quick, I'm gonna pause there. He did, I think, also
we talked about that earlier.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up. I mean, and he tiptoes around, not just here, but he tiptoes around like the impact that he made on America. And again, he doesn't want to come out say, hey, I made lots of grave mistakes during my administration that I wish I could turn back. But that's essentially what I heard him saying, reading between the lines. If you're looking at it from what I think an objective person that wants great leadership, representing our country, he recognized that he maybe dropped the ball where, and I think, again, him going into office way back in 2008, I like to believe that he was really the change agent, the champion that he was made out to be, right? And then easy to get co-opted in government, with all these people pulling you in different directions, telling you this is the way the world really works, and sorry, you have some great deals there, Mr. Obama, but unless you are really gung-ho and have the fortitude that a person that gets to your position has once in a century, maybe if that, good luck. And unfortunately, I think he just crumpled under the immense pressure, if you want to kind of summarize it all. But, the system, the bureaucracy that has not just been the United States government, but this international order that you talked about.
It only gets worse, I think, at an international level. I've said this before, and this summarizes my feeling about Barack Obama. Barack Obama was an exceptional spokesperson for the United States and for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
And that is really what he was, in my opinion. I mean, he was the head account executive on the account.
Right.
And he is a spokesperson, eloquent speaker, great presenter. I love it when I hear people say, he looks so presidential. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, he does. But he did not
unzip the suit.
He did not have, to me, the inner metal of what it takes to be a George Washington, somebody to lead as the chief executive. And I served in the Navy for 5 years, and I watched closely my commanding officers and even people above them. And this alpha dominant mentality, I saw that as a consistent trait amongst the senior level people who were in charge because of the responsibility upon their shoulders. I see that with Donald Trump. Is he reckless? Yeah, at times. Does he say things that I disagree with? Absolutely. He says some things that are comical. Yeah. I find myself busting out laughing at a lot of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, too, to me, is kind of like he's putting forth the presidency in a more down-to-earth light, that we've taken ourselves so seriously.
Right.
Like we take this guy, this dignified, diplomat, as he is. He's coming across as this dignified.
He was once presented as the perfect human. I mean,
really?
never really like.
Right.
But that's like
guy who can do no wrong, essentially, and his wife Michelle Obama.
Right.
And, they're just
so a large percentage of America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying. I mean, I have respect for Barack Obama, and did he do a good job? He did a better job than I would do.
And to the point that he was like, basically, again, not trying to say that he fucked up in all these ways, that he wishes he could do it better, but he did kind of like give himself, you could say, a little bit of a cop out, but that I think by the end of my term, basically, you were better off being born then than you were being born at the beginning of my term. Like, it's still like society has gotten better through my time in office. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but
this is what he's going to say.
I forgot where he had said it, but I really just wanted to touch on the point that he brought up about the reorganization of this international order that we're going through right now. And
do you want to continue with it?
A little bit,
okay,
yeah.
And the carnage that had destroyed Europe and destroyed much of Asia.
And really quick to preface this, just before I had started playing it the first time, now just less than a minute into this, he was basically talking about where we can all agree about, the ideals of democracy, short of, some of the issues like economically speaking or something like abortion. But then he's starting to then pivot into where we picked off, where how important it is to have this international order to kind of maintain the democracy, across the globe.
And
can you turn it up a little bit?
It was so shocking that I think people pulled back and they said, all right, yes, the United States, we're the most powerful country at this point. A lot of our competitors are destroyed. We were relatively protected because of geography. And so we'll set up a rules-based system internationally that allows for freedom of navigation and rules governing trade. And we're going to have an alliance with Europe, including our former enemies, and in Asia, including our former enemies, because even though we are the most powerful country, we know that, having seen what happened in World War II, we're better off if we can figure out how to get everybody to cooperate. And
also, too, as I said earlier to you, one of the reasons that we did what we did was because of a threat from the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union, because after World War II, the next threat to this country, which was real apparent, was the Soviet Union and communism. And that's one of the reasons why we did what we did.
Well, but he's even more so
he's
talking
talking
about
more
like
about
going
NAFTA.
into World War II, though, that how important it was that we were all able to, work together to fight, this great force of evil that was, stemming from Nazi Germany.
What I'm picking up from where you started it is he's talking about post World War II and rising out of the rubble and how this international globalism began. I think he's kind of saying globalism began then, and if he is saying that, I would agree. But I'm just saying to you that one of the main reasons why, Great Britain's been a great ally, and we wanted to help them, but one of the main reasons why we wanted to help Germany after what they put the world through is because we wanted to keep communism out of Western Germany, and in France, and squash the threat of communism moving across the continent of Europe.
I think it's multifaceted. I think more so, though, it was still just this, hey, now this evil force, and especially personified in the name of Adolf Hitler, right? That, all right, evil is squandered. We all recognize, we need to go back to, non-wartime society, but there's now this question, to your point, who's in charge of course, like Germany and, what's left over of, all of what was occupied Nazi territory, but, there's now the power vacuum with, the Soviet Union and the United States. And I think it was more just a competition to, who can become the global superpower.
Arms race.
Right.
The Cold War started pretty much right after World War II ended.
Yep.
And the Berlin Wall goes up, right? And
I don't think it was like inherently just democracy versus communism. It was, hey, maybe we can wrap it up this way. Hey, we don't want communism to spread to this area, when in reality, I think more so in reality, it's whatever other form of government, even if, we were to call Russia's form of government democracy, I think we still would have found some way to propagate the Cold War without, necessarily saying, oh, we got to, abolish communism from, taking hold and growing roots, across the globe. I think that was just an easy way to kind of frame up how we can work against a new, inherently bad force. And because it's not like this actual like force of, Nazi Germany died, right? It was some of it co-opted into the United States, some of it co-opted into the Soviet Union. A lot of it stayed just there in Europe, actually then overseeing the civilian populace that, had their whole homes and, towns destroyed, right? Someone had to stay in leadership positions. And it was, many decades still in the way that we've had like the Warren Commission investigate JFK's death, coming out and saying, hey, there's conspiracy going on here that hasn't yet made it out to the public. In similar ways, there's been internal investigations about, the Nazi Party never really died within Germany, right? Some people still
it died. The Nazi Party died. There is no Nazi Party in Germany.
Not by name.
Well, there are still nationalistic beliefs.
But but there was, after the Third Reich, there was like a Fourth and Fifth Reich, more so underground. But a lot of those same Nazi officials ended up in both the east side and west side of Germany. Mm-hmm. Still the exact same policies, not under the
right.
Nazi
and
name.
The reason that they were utilized, my understanding is because they were people who understood the infrastructure and understood how things worked. And I know, and Bev would be good to talk about this because she grew up with scientists that her parents met who were German, and they came over after, Werner von Braun, the founder of NASA, father of American rocketry, right?
Yep.
He was a Nazi, right? And a member of the Nazi Party. He was a scientist, physicist, or whatever. But we didn't want those people to fall into the hands of the Soviet Union
Right.
because they would use them to develop their technology.
Right.
And so we got as many of them as we could. And we brought them over here, gave them a good life.
Right.
Although they were Nazis and members of the Nazi Party, they still were co-opted into our system
Right.
out of national security.
And
So-
I think it was more that, and again, you could say like, hey, it's the security risk is communism, but it's really, and again, I don't think it was actually Russia. I mean, you could argue that, Stalin might have tried to then, make pushes into elsewhere in Asia or, take over Europe.
He did move into Eastern Europe in the satellite countries, and there was bloodshed there, and where Lithuania and Romania and some the Yugoslavia, these Soviet they became Soviet satellites, and that's where the Churchill talked about there was a dreadful iron curtain falling across Europe, and it was a threat, man. It was and think about the bomb shelters in the 50s and 60s that people were buying, and when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, people were really thinking this is the beginning of World War III. So communism was a huge threat.
I don't think it was that, though. Again, I think it's the same forces that we have within our own government that want to make it that some other external entity is this inherently bad, evil force that we got to go deal with because that's going to drive our
What
industry.
force are you referring to?
That we would be looked at in the same regard from the Russian perspective. That, hey, well,
They did look at us as a threat.
Well, exactly, because what business do we have?
We formed NATO because of this.
And,
NATO
yeah,
was
and
formed out of the Cold War.
And European politics, right? We should have gone in to help Britain, stand our ground against Japan that, again, is arguable that, we let happen to begin with. And then, collect the debts that were owed from World War II and let Europe figure out Europe, right?
Well, the fear of letting Europe figure out Europe is that the Soviet Union would start sticking their beak in and would start doing more and, to mobilize or to get people to agree that, what, this democracy thing has not worked. Let's embrace communism. That was the biggest fear, is that Europe would fall to communism. And that's why all these American military bases form in Germany, which are there to this day. My brother served in Bitburg, Germany. Jeff's, your dad, they were, y'all, your father, your granddad was stationed in Germany, right? All the people in Germany, all the kids your age and younger, they all speak German. What other language do they know very well? English.
Yep.
They're taught, in fact, in Germany, I studied German in school, and I talked to a lot of Germans, but they say growing up, you go to, like, we went to English class, right?
Yep.
Well, in Germany, you go to German, you learn German grammar and all that stuff. You also have to learn English at the same time. So you have an English class. That's because we won the Second World War, and that's also to prevent, them speaking Russian or, we want to democratize.
I think a lot of that, though, was already happening with the
Guess what?
early ages of like the motion picture industry, right?
I'm lost with what you're saying. I'm not following you because you seem to not be saying that after the Second World War, communism was a big threat to Europe. And I'm saying that
I think that was like made to be the boogeyman.
I disagree. I think it was a massive fear and a threat.
I think in the same way that Nazism here in America is, and not even just here in America, the Ukraine situation. I think that sort of like fascism, Nazism, people have the same concern today, and I just think it's difficult to look at it as such, comparing it to, the Red Scare where everyone,
Well, if Canada was Nazi or Mexico was Nazi, then it would be the same kind of thing. But I do not think that the fear of communism in taking over and influencing Western Europe thought in the 50s and 60s.
But again, I don't think
the belief that communism could do that, I don't think it was viewed like Nazism is viewed here today. It was a serious threat. They had all these troops and all this, they had nuclear weapons
but call the term what you will. Again, I think communism was like co-opted and made out to be the bad word. And again, I'm not supporting, the structure of but I think it's like, hey, we very clearly have an adversary that if left unchecked, they could become the sole dominant power in the world. And instead of framing it that way, it's like, well, we just got to stop this ideal of government from spreading instead of the actual entity itself, which again, we would have seen, like, it's impossible to say what would have happened, had, the Soviet Union even been left unchecked, right? And we didn't start NATO, but I like to take more of the JFK, sort of philosophy that there's more powers within our own governments trying to pit us against one another than actually the need to fight one another, right? And not even just the need, but the desire.
Well, we'll agree to, I think, disagree on this theory, but I would be interested in hearing what Brock has to say to finish up what he's saying.
Are you saying kind of like the TSA? Like how, like, we have this boogeyman that was terrorism that established the TSA, so now we have more government, is that where you're going with it?
Yeah, and it's like, I guess the communism is this, like, we need to, structure our democracy, structure our foreign policy in a way that might even take away some of our freedoms, like, hey, we got to build the American ideals in this sort of way to fight it against communism. And it's, I think,
founded the CIA.
Right. And I think it was really kind of a way to take away our rights and, like, hey, give us a bad guy that we're all on board against fighting.
That may very well be. My point to you is that it was a serious threat.
And I don't think it's one or the other. Like, I think it's probably a combination of both, right?
Well, I'm going to say that, for 50 years or 30, 40 years, it was a major concern. And I mean, the military was, when I went through Navy training, the Soviet Union was still in existence. They broke up when I was in service, but we talked a lot about, Russia's doing this. And, my brothers talked about it, how we're training and getting intel from, spies or whatever, what the Soviets were doing and how we're going to counter that threat. And so it was a major, I don't think it was, you seem to feel it was more like a conspiratorial thing against the Soviet Union. And they were a massive threat at that time. And I'll go back to something I said earlier.
I think they were a threat, but this idea of communism itself, like, separate it from Russia, the Soviet Union, I don't think that was the threat itself that it was made out to be. It's like, hey, Russia, who happens to have, as we describe it, a communist government.
Yeah.
But it's communism that's bad. It's not the people that...
No, right. But it's their form of government and how they feel government should work. And Bolshevik, I mean, the Nazis hated Russia, and they hated Bolshevism, it was called back then. And I've seen footage of Nazi rallies where this is like, Deutschland muss Bolshevist frei. Germany must stay Bolshevik free. And they hated, that's why, if Hitler had not turned on because they had this Soviet-German pact, right?
Yep.
And they split Poland, after Poland was invaded, they split Poland in half and formed a border. And then what did Hitler do in, I think, the summer of 42? He launched Barbarossa and went into the Soviet Union to conquer them. They hated Russia. And the ugliest part of World War II happened in the East, not where we were in the West. We didn't have, this is simple for me to say, an easy armchair quarterbacking, but the atrocities and all the horror of the Second World War, it happened all over, but it happened in the East, I think, to a level never seen before.
And we were talking about this, and again, ignorantly so, and I had since seen the numbers and have, again, since forgotten them. But it was millions, many, 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 many millions of Russians that died.
I think about 12 million to 15 million people
and
died.
We were, I think, in that last conversation talking about a million, where it was hundreds of thousands and like maybe a combined couple of million for the rest of the all the allied nations, all of their troop loss combined.
I think we lost about 400,000, 300, 400,000, maybe 500,000 total people that were killed
in combat.
Yeah. And look at and the Soviets, I mean, they lost soldiers, but they also lost civilians.
And it's easy to say that it was done for them, right, their country, but it was really like an act of the world, right? I mean,
what do you mean done for them?
Like, obviously, they were fighting for their country, their sovereignty, right? But more than their sovereignty, I mean, it was literally a world war, right? I mean, and then all of a sudden, people that were essential without the Soviet Union, I think it's very arguable that the United States, with the rest of the Allied forces, wouldn't have been enough to, push back Nazi Germany.
If they
Or,
had
like,
not-
it would have, at the very least, probably the war would have continued for another half a decade.
Who knows? But I'll tell
Or
you this:
turn nuclear.
I'll tell you this right now, man. If Hitler had not, against many of his generals' advice, if he had not turned east, all of Europe, Western Europe, had fallen. Spain was still neutral. Portugal was still neutral, but they were working with the Nazis. Switzerland was working with the Nazis. The only country that was defiant and stood against the Nazis was Great Britain. Had he focused totally on Great Britain and gotten and starved them or whatever and blockaded them using U-boats, whatever, if they had beaten the British, there's a chance that we'd be speaking German right now. I'm serious, man. If he had not gone, he hated Bolshevism so much, though. And I mean, the National German Workers' Party, they're socialists, right? They're fascists, but it was a socialist idea. Right. And the idea being that you belong to the state, right? So that's essentially, it's just more of a militant, aggressive form of socialism where it's not just the economics of the community or your country is evenly divided. Your whole being is devoted to the state. So you will serve in the military and et cetera. But anyway, my point is we needed the Soviets. And once we entered, then Hitler had a two-front war. So he had to split his resources.
And again, I'm not expecting you know in like some great detail or if any detail, but how much do you think Hitler was actually like the grand poobah, like calling all the shots? You know, obviously he's the one attributed and like, but how much of it was like, it may have even gotten out of his control and then we're like, oh yeah, he's the one that tells these military generals go do this versus again, he was kind of captured from his own machine. And again, obviously I'm not trying to, but
I can tell you what I do because I really like World War II history and I do know this. After the Battle of Stalingrad, which happened in, 43 maybe. It was when the German Eastern. It was called. He had Army Group North, he had Army Group South, and he had Army Group Center. And Army Group Center's job was to get to Moscow. And he diverted that force and sent them south to help Army Group South at a little place called Stalingrad. And he didn't like it because it had Stalin's name to it, right? Yep. And when the Soviets dug in there and it turned into this horrific battle, probably the most human suffering other than Leningrad, which was besieged for 2 years. He starved Leningrad for 1.5 to 2 years. Ooh. And but when Army Group Center failed, 90,000 Germans surrendered under Field Marshal von Paulus. Hitler made him a field marshal because he told Hitler that he would not. Hitler said, "Don't surrender. Just go ahead and fight to the very bitter end." And Paulus said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So Hitler made him a field marshal. And then I think a week later or 5 days later, he surrendered to the Soviets. He was pissed off because the circumstances were so dire. It was cold and they didn't have the proper clothes or whatever. Or, they didn't have the proper supplies and they were stretched out. And so 90,000 plus Germans surrendered to the Soviets. About 5,000 of those 90,000 saw Germany and the other 85,000 died. It's just such a human travesty, man. So what I'm saying is after that happened, I think it was after Stalingrad, Hitler took control of, and he fired a lot of his generals, and he took control. And then the assassination attempt happened on his life. I think my time frame is right here. I'm pretty sure Hitler either took control of the Eastern Front and making military decisions as the commander-in-chief. I think it was after Stalingrad. It might have been before, but it was everyone knew that
was a pivotal moment.
Nazis knew that they're not going to win this war because they lost in the East and they started retreating. And once that happened, then we landed on the 6th of June, 1944. We were only there for a year and a half, before it was over. And so we make a big deal out of World War II here. We lost a fraction of the people that the Russians lost.
Yeah, I've heard it. Again, no one wants to hear this, especially in the society where we like to think we're nothing but the good guys, right? That Nazi Germany wasn't defeated that day, or the enemy was not defeated that day, that they just changed uniform. And again, some to the USSR, some to United States and the Allied forces.
Well, I don't know.
And that's, again, what became of the international order. That, hey, let's...
It sounds conspiratorial where you're going with this, because I think the German people had had enough. They had been through so much, with all the promises that Hitler promised. He said, give me 4 or 5 years and I'll show you Germany like you've never seen before. And they were right, because fast forward from when he said that to when it ended, Germany's decimated. Berlin is decimated.
I think it just wrapped up very nice and tightly in a way that almost seems too good to be true, in the way that, all right, Hitler's dead, let's call it all off, guys. Everyone go back home. And obviously, the fight continued in the Pacific for some time, in North Africa for some time, and maybe even, parts of Europe that I'm not as familiar with. But
I think the North African campaign had ended.
Okay.
And the Germans were pushed out of North Africa. Rommel led that charge.
Okay, I thought there was still some ongoing skirmishes.
North Africa was liberated, and they were out of North Africa. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure that the North African campaign, because Patton was involved with that, and once they won there, then he went north and hit the bottom of Europe and came up through the belly of Europe.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to get too tinfoil hat conspiracy, but, I do think Hitler died right at or about the time he was said to have died. I think if anyone actually goes and looks into what is known facts, like history, there is no decisive evidence to ever show Hitler died as described in the bunker. Sometimes it's said that it was gun to the head. Some said it was cyanide, or some people said it was both.
Yeah.
And there's, again, no evidence. Stalin, until the day Stalin died, thought Hitler had escaped. What I think had really happened was that Hitler did not want to be paraded around as or any of his artifacts be paraded around as war prizes, right, as trophies. Right. And so probably did commit suicide, sometime, leading up to the bunker being invaded by the Soviet Union. Again, a lot of people have the misconception, well, yeah, the Americans went in and killed Hitler. No, that was not the case. And we weren't the one to discover the bunker. Americans weren't even allowed in the bunker for at least a week, if not weeks on end. And
we didn't take Berlin. The Soviets took Berlin.
Yep.
Eisenhower made that decision, and a lot of people were pissed off that he allowed that. But he allowed the Soviets.
We weren't going to be able to make it in the same time frame, and then they were supposed to be let in, and then the Soviet didn't even want to let the United States in for quite some time into Berlin, as far as I've heard it, for at least a few days. I
don't know what I'm sure that Allied soldiers went into the bunker, but I don't know how long. It was a time period had gone by. I don't know how long.
There was a special task force that Stalin had put together to investigate the death of Hitler, and again, there's never been skull fragments or anything that.
Yeah, there was a skull fragment that had a hole. That had a hole, and then a DNA testing, I think, proved that they didn't know who it was, but they
a young lady.
Saw it was female.
Yeah.
So, and I've seen a lot of the conspiracy theories that Hitler was flown out of Berlin.
Yeah.
It's my understanding there is a Luftwaffe pilot who went on record saying that he flew Hitler out, and that they went north somewhere in Denmark or wherever, and he caught a U-boat and made it to South America.
I've heard similar
and then
stories.
there's interviews of people that claim that
sightings
that they saw him and
drinking coffee.
But
again, it's even if
also
you did,
Martin Bormann, who was his chief of staff,
and that's not even disputed. And there were even in the 50s, 60s, even through the 70s, the CIA was getting reports, and they had ongoing investigations after Hitler's death.
Wouldn't that be something?
Right. And again, I'm not going that far with it. I'm just saying that. Let's say Hitler died ahead of time, when he was said to have died in the bunker. That's great, what everyone was out there to do. Because think about like America, like, yeah, we didn't make the same sort of sacrifices that the USSR did. But if we ended that war in any way other than Hitler dying and Nazi Germany coming to an end, what the hell did we send all of our Americans, you know, to go fight, right? You know, it had to be, you know, cleaned up in this like kind of picturesque sort of way that I don't think was the actual reality as it's often reported to be. And again, I'm not trying to say what...
You're a conspiracy theorist, man. That's your deal. No,
But
I
again,
say that in a joking way.
Yeah, but again, I just, like in any and every aspect of history, there's a lot more
Sure.
than what
Absolutely.
anyone and everyone
That's
is
true.
led to believe.
Going back to this Barack Obama, is there anything else on this that you wanted to show, or you just wanted to hear him talk about how there was...
I do recommend you and anyone else that cares to, you know, get insights from, you know, influential people like Obama. I mean, I thought this was well worth the whole hour plus, you know, listen. But yeah, that in particular, I thought, and to me, it just sounds like, you know, there's a lot of like memes and whatever going on, like pre-election, even post-election, like, oh my God, don't you realize that you're the bad guys, and like the other like party again, don't you realize that you're the bad guys? And, you know, no one thinks that, you know, their group or their party, you know, are the bad guys. And, again, obviously it shouldn't really be America versus, you know, the rest of the world, but I just thought it was interesting from the standpoint of him bringing up the international order that we really are still belonging to. That
A lot of people feel that Barack Obama is one of the people that's ruling or that's controlling, well, the Democratic Party in this country, and some people even feel that, you know, he and another handful of other world elites are controlling things. Like, you know,
supposedly he wanted to have a open primary. I think it was him and was it Nancy Pelosi that wanted to have the primary? But then there's a lot of other people that weren't taking his calls and already endorsed Kamala Harris, and then, you know, took it. Oh, well, sorry, I already endorsed Kamala.
I just can't believe that if Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and the powerful elites of the Democratic Party, if they wanted an open primary, they would have had one, and they obviously didn't want one.
But they're not the ones. They're the ones taking the hundreds of millions of dollars in donations, right? They're not the ones that are putting up that money. So again, it's very convoluted. In the sense of,
Can we take a short break?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brian. I got it. This water, man, it's running right through me.
We'll be right back.
I think we'll need to wrap up. It's almost 1.
Yeah, that works for me.
Alright, I'm just gonna keep it rolling. We'll just
Yep.
cut this chunk out.
Felt like I was on another part, but I lost my train of thought. Wrapped it around.
I can't wait to see the community notes on this video.
I don't think we're talking about anything that
Nazism, history, government, money. Like,
Well,
there's
that-
so many community notes that can apply.
Well, we don't even have the viewership to worry about that. Not yet.
I don't know what I'm saying. They backtrack on
Yeah.
videos because they don't just do it to recent videos posted. Older videos that have a huge amount of like comments and likes and dislikes even. They retroactively add community notes, which in some cases like doesn't make sense because the events that are being talked about in the video are like pre the post hoc the discovery of a lot of the facts that are then being put into the community notes.
We need to get a historian or, you know, that kind of a person in here to talk when we talk about in the future if we were to ever want to discuss, you know, some aspect. What we might want to do is have somebody who is quote unquote an expert in that field or has a lot of knowledge about it.
See, the problem is everyone's going to view them as a quote unquote expert because they're going to go in
more
there.
of an expert than we are. Just so there's more substance to what we're saying.
Would you be interested in a religious history episode, specifically from a Christian perspective. I know I'd brought up the Shroud of Turin. There's a guy that's out of like all the people online that produce content about like its origins, its authenticity, whether it's connected or not to Jesus.
I would love that, man.
Yeah,
I love that stuff.
There's one guy that's based out of the Metro Atlanta area that's very notable, and I watched like an hour or whatever like segment about
they would come in on a Zoom, kind of a Zoom thing.
I would hope to bring them in person.
I'd love it.
Yeah.
I'd love it.
Yeah, I guess just wrap
up?
Yeah, wrapping up. I want to show off one more video clip, and then I have a couple brief little announcements I want to get out there. But this is from the recent cabinet meeting earlier today. And of course, they do talk about tariffs, China. Robert Kennedy, as I mentioned earlier, made the comment about having an idea of what's causing autism by September.
So this is today.
This is earlier today. Yep.
Of $254 million has gone out. And lastly, 10,000 people who have not been born yet, 15 years into the future, $69 million, and they haven't even been born yet. In one case, they will be born 129 years from now. The United States government sent them $41,000, and they're not born yet. So, under the Department of Labor, those are the things that we're uncovering. I couldn't be more honored to tell the American people that we're bringing back their dollars and we're saving them and returning them to the United States Treasury. Also, jobs numbers. Last Friday, 228,000 new jobs were reported. That is good for the American people. That is my primary job, is to grow that workforce under your leadership. So we've kicked off the America at Work tour, and we'll be visiting all 50 states, and I'll be working with my colleagues here to do just that. So thank you, Mr. President. We're going to grow this economy. We're going to keep our focus on the American worker.
So you're finding tremendous fraud, though. Those numbers are really bad when you...
Unheard of. And people, and we'll...
Really quick, I missed a little bit of what I wanted to show off, so I'm rewinding a little bit.
We'll go back and claw the rest of those billions of dollars back. And on the heels of that, late last night, we're understanding unemployment insurance fraud. That trust needs to be whole for the American people. When we need it for who deserves it. That's not what we're seeing. And the numbers that we saw last night, again, exposed by our partners at DOJ, at the Department of Labor. Since 2020, over $400 million of payments have gone out already. And when you hear these numbers, apparently in the United States, we have over almost 25,000 people who are over 115 years old, who are collecting $59 million that we have sent out to people. Talk about fraudulent behavior. Mr. President, 28,000 people between 1 and 5 years old have collected fraudulent payments at the tune of $254 million has gone out. And lastly, 10,000 people who have not been born yet.
So people that not been born yet, 1 to 5 year olds receiving, payments from the government. And of course, there probably are some, cases where these 1 to 5 year olds are, on some special federal healthcare program, or I don't know. Again, it's coming from the Department of Labor, but it's just, again, if that's happening within the Department of Labor, how many other departments and divisions of our government can we save tens of millions of dollars? And I know what you're talking about. It takes millions to equal $1 trillion, but there's
a million,
a million,
1,000 billion,
1,000 billion, or a million millions.
Yeah, a million millions.
Yep. And so obviously there's many more of those to uncover. And that was even something that was kind of like a drop in the bucket, how Trump is doing like the gold card or the Trump card, that you could buy essentially a green card for $5 million. And the numbers that I heard were kind of surprising. And I think they stated 40 million people could afford to buy that, like outside the United States could afford to buy that Trump card. And if that's true, 40 million times 5 million, that's more than enough to cover our debt, get us out of our national debt. I think their estimation was as much as like they were originally like, if we sell 10 million of them, 5 million a piece, that will be $50 trillion. And so that would be enough to get us out of the
Are
hole.
you sure your numbers are right
Yes,
on that?
yes, but again, it's not actually gonna happen. I would love for it to be
$5 million
times.
times 40,000.
No, times 40 million people. I don't know what that is, but they think there's. They were originally hoping to sell 10 million at 5 million a piece, and that would be 50 trillion. Again, the million times a million, right? So now it's 5 million times 40 million.
Yeah, I'm just not very good in math.
But yeah, so
I can't imagine that would equal that.
Oh, and sorry, it's 5 million times 10 million.
Maybe
would be,
5 trillion.
No,
not 50 trillion.
So if it was 5 million times 1 million, that would be 5 trillion. If it was 5 million times 10 million, that's $50 trillion. I did look into this so
the
I was
numbers
like,
are just so
right. It's insane, but I think 1,000 have been sold so far. So it's like only 900, and so they say 40 million people could buy it. 10 million were the first numbers that I heard that they were hoping to be able to sell it to. The most recent numbers I heard, they think they may be able to sell 1 million of them. So it'll be like $5 trillion. So not enough to take us out of our debt, but that's not nothing.
God bless
right?
him for the effort,
And the thought, yeah.
And we've got a business guy as the chief executive.
He's trying again.
He's making an effort, and he's doing things that are not traditional, and that's what's required. And you go to any corporate team building exercise or any of these conferences, and I know because I've been to many of them, and you constantly hear things like, we got to think outside the box. We can't do business the way we've always done business. And then when somebody tries to do that, what happens? They're heckled and they're objected to.
If it's not immediate success with no turmoil, then we're not even willing to
and
give,
that's one of the reasons why so many of these politicians, it's quote unquote, it's all talk.
Right.
It sounds good, and they look presidential, they act presidential, and they're saying all the right things, and they're making you feel good. But they're not going to do a damn thing about really bringing forth change. This bulldog is going to make the change. He's doing what's required. I really will say, I could be wrong, but I think he'll go down in history as one of the most influential presidents we've ever had in this country. Like him or not. Warts and all, and they're there. Absolutely. But I think he's going to go down as one of the most influential presidents we've ever had.
I agree.
Ever had.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really, back when I was even, before I was a Trump supporter, this would have been late 2015, 2016. I was reading that book I mentioned about Theodore Roosevelt, Mornings on Horseback. And even then I was like, wow, he kind of sounds like Trump, you know? But, I didn't even dare say that to anyone, comparing Donald Trump to Theodore Roosevelt. And then more.
What year was this?
2015, 2016.
Yeah. So we're talking a decade ago. Yeah. And look at how your perspective has changed.
Right.
And back then,
and I've only more and more thought that, he could just as much be considered if the United States were to go on another 200-300 years, which I would hope so. He could be looked at as a founding father retroactively in the same way that Theodore Roosevelt was, even,
I would
not
love
coming into office until after 1900.
Wouldn't it be fun to be able to just quickly jump 100 years out, and hopefully we're still here as a country,
peak,
and see what the historians are saying about him.
And again, that's kind of wrapping it up with this. And literally my lifelong goal is to live to 103. So not 100 years from today, but make it to the year 2100.
Why 103?
And it's really 102 in 9 months, but make it to the year 2100.
Okay.
So I always love the idea of reading about people in history born in the late 1880s or 1890s, making it to the year 2000, seeing, of course, all the political change, all the technological change, societal, cultural change. And I would love to be able to look back and see, obviously be a part of it.
I'd be 137. So I was born in 67. So I won't make it, man.
133.
133, sorry. Yeah. Again, the math.
Yeah.
It was my understanding there would be no math.
All right, Brian. But on that note, I do want to make a couple of quick comments. one, look into the Build Back Better initiative. There's some really interesting information about how NPR and PBS was up on the chopping block recently to get funding taken away from them. And then there was some opposition against that because, well, there's been this bill that was passed under the Biden administration, like Biden's Build Back Better bill, to bring broadband internet to these rural areas. Of course, they made the application process so, purposefully, I mean, and this is again kind of coming from Jon Stewart and this other self-proclaimed like liberal Ezra Klein that Jon Stewart had on his show, that you could have designed a way to make this bill more difficult for those rural people to get internet than the way that this bill was designed. 56, I think, original applicants from different municipalities all throughout the United States applied. By the end of like the 3.5 year application process, got narrowed down to 3. And in that time,
what 3 happened? Actually benefited from it.
Well, just got approved and like are continuing to want to move forward with it.
So it was set up to where you couldn't take advantage of it.
Right, because they want to push the state media narrative from NPR or PBS where you're not getting any other news and you're only getting this information about what's going on. And you know what happened in the meantime? Elon came out with Starlink and provided internet, high-speed internet to all these rural areas. But again, he's the Nazi, right?
Yeah.
Like a fourth of the cost.
Yeah.
Man, I have just real quick. It came to my attention from a financial guy that I followed, and this guy was very much clairvoyant type of. He wasn't a money manager. He was a guy who studied the economy and made predictions. So he was a little colorful character, not anything crystal ballish. But one of the things that he said that I have learned and I respect is that the person that stands up throughout history and is radical and really believes in what they're saying and it goes against the flow, even if the flow wants it and talks about it, anybody who stands up and actually does the progressive thing will be ridiculed and will be shunned and will be persecuted by the mass.
Right.
The mass. And that's, I think, exactly what's happening with Trump and Elon Musk.
Absolutely. Well. Yeah. Same thing happened with Samuel Insull, Thomas Edison's right-hand man that really built Thomas Edison's empire into what it became. And then
Ford too. Henry Ford was ostracized and ridiculed.
Galileo, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
persecuted.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, the masses is always right until it's proven wrong by typically starting with one person.
Yep. Those are the real heroes, the people that stand in the face. And I've always said, a strong leader, a true, really strong leader will stand in front and be unpopular and can stand and face the fire. In my opinion, Donald Trump does that every day. He stands and stands on his beliefs. And
any other person in modern times, I think, literally any other person in modern times would have crumpled with what he and his family went through really these last 2 election cycles.
It's phenomenal what he's
let alone the one that he actually, the first one. But it wasn't as bad then because I don't think, again, no one expected him to win the night of until Hillary Clinton won.
All the jokes and he was a laughing. He was a Saturday Night Live.
He was a joking matter, not a real threat like he
was
is.
A punchline, right. And then he won.
Real threat, yeah.
He won, and a lot of this. Let's real quickly, just a quick comment. He's been in office 4 months, right?
Yep.
Compare these 4 months. Of course, a lot of change is happening, stuff is happening, but I'm hoping in this second term you're not going to see all of the infighting that happened on his first watch, and it's because the people who were, like you said earlier, the people who were working with him, they were more along the line of the mass and doing the business the way we've always done it. He's got now a cabinet of people who have bought in. And who I think are going to really enact what he's talking about.
And like it or not, I mean, we just see how popular he has. He's got the populist movement, to the tunes of tens of millions of Americans behind him. He's got, basically a large part of the House and the Senate, behind him. Obviously, it's not, full like Republican Party, which again, I want it to be all pro-America party, whatever name that falls under. But you know,
be Democrat or Republican.
he's getting involved as necessary in the local elections. Like, hey, you know, we'll primary you. You know, we'll put up a populist candidate, you know, that has my backing. You know, and so I think he is able to have a larger, more kind of uniform effect this time around. Again, like it or not, than he was last time, because now, like, more people have woken up, again, for better for worse, to what he is, or at least what they want to see.
More people are woke.
Right. They've awoken.
You know, one person might say, one analysis might be that him losing in 20 might have been the best thing.
I think so.
The fact that he lost, and then...
I would have never been a supporter of Donald Trump. Had he won in 2020, I did not vote for him in 2020, had no intention of voting for him in 2020. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that skyrocketed his popularity in a way that, you know, like the Star Wars quote, "Strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you can ever imagine." And he was struck down and became more powerful than they could ever imagine. Anyone thought,
good analogy, a Star Wars analogy.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's been a great podcast.
Yeah, want to just promote a couple of upcoming events. Let me pull them up here. I just tried to pull up the event directly, but if you go to Build and Fly with VMI, we are hosting a workshop. We had actually talked about it previously. It had gotten moved to now April 19th. So not tomorrow, Saturday, but a week from tomorrow, or a week from when this goes live. If you're watching it the day it goes live, April 19th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. up in Martinsville, Virginia. NCI, AFCEA, Shenandoah University, and VMI Virginia Military Institute are all partnering with us to do, again, a drone building workshop.
Nice.
Predominantly high school and college age students, but I think it is open to the public. So should anyone be local and is listening to this in time, feel free to go online. Again, search Build and Fly with VMI or check the description. You can register for that workshop. And then similarly, I don't think information is public about it yet, but May 2nd, I'll also be involved in a virtual presentation through Dennis Hayes. So if you're interested in connecting more with me and the work that we're doing outside of this podcast, then you can connect with me in those ways. But is there anything you want to promote or talk about?
No.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone, and you'll see us in the next episode.
Excellent. All right.